Chapter 520. Tell me, how could Her Royal Highness kill people? Is she still a woman? The hunchbacked old woman walked along the wall with a basket in her hand. She shook her head and sighed. She had just heard the news when she was buying groceries. She heard that people's heads were chopped off and rolled a few feet away. Even Qin Xiang's face was covered in blood. It was scary just thinking about it. When she walked to a certain place, she was blocked by the crowd. She saw a group of young girls gathered around the wall. They stuck their heads out and chattered about something. "What's going on?" The old woman pulled a young woman and asked. "It's Grandma's son." The young woman looked inside and said, "It's the government's notice. It says that it's best for us women to have children after the age of 16. Otherwise, it's easy to have a difficult birth. I heard that 3 out of 10 women who have children at the age of 13 or 14 don't survive." The woman touched her chest and said with lingering fear, "Isn't that right? I remember when I gave birth to our Ming. I was only 14. I was half a step into the gates of hell. It wasn't easy to save my life, and I was sick for half a year. Look at that girl from the Chen family. She only got married at 18, and only gave birth 3 years after she got married. She was laughed at because of this, but other people can walk the next day after giving birth. Her Royal Highness is still the best. She spoke for us women. She said that we can only get married after the age of 16 so that we can have a good birth. She also asked the imperial doctor to help us think of a way. In the future, it won't be so scary to have children. Unlike that guy surnamed Han. He said that the role of us women is to give birth to children. Her Royal Highness was so angry that she took a knife to scare him. She was even locked up by His Majesty. Tell me, why is there no reason for us women in this world?" She wanted to say something more, but was pulled by the people next to her. A woman came over and whispered, "Don't talk too much, Grandma's son. Grandma's son's 13-year-old daughter died a few days ago due to a difficult birth." "Ah." The woman's expression changed and she didn't dare to speak anymore. The old woman stood there in a daze. The basket in her hand fell to the ground. After a moment, a cry suddenly came from the crowd. "My poor Lian. My Xiaofan. My Xiaofan just got pregnant a few days ago. She's only 13. At the edge of the crowd, another woman's expression changed. For the men of the capital, today was destined to be an unforgettable day. He did not know why his wife, who was usually gentle and virtuous, had a sorrowful expression on her face today. She did not speak much. She was usually irritable and easily angered, but today, she became even more severe. If she did something wrong, she would be reprimanded, and if it was serious, she would be beaten and scolded. Rumor had it that Butcher Zhang, who lived in the east of the city, was straddled by his fierce wife on the street. Butcher Zhang's wife was even sturdier than his family's pigs. Rumor had it that old Zhang fainted on the spot and was now clamoring to divorce his wife. Also, when a group of women walked past the door just now, the old woman who was walking in front was crying and saying something like, "Old thief Han, give me back my daughter." Those women were all panting with rage, and they didn't look like they were easy to deal with. What were they doing? Could it be that old thief Han had defiled this old woman's daughter, and she was going to go to his door to seek justice? This was really going to be a good show to watch. Thus, many people walked out of their homes and followed those women. In the indoor playground of the Li residence, Fong was bare-chested, and with one hand, he was rocking the improved rocking car. His face was not red, and he was not panting. The palace guard outside the door stared at him with his eyes wide open. He had tried that thing before, and it required 2 hands to swing it with great difficulty. It didn't take long before he couldn't stand it anymore, but this man, this arm strength. If he were to hit him with a punch, even a black bear would die. Fong had been rocking the rocking car with one hand for almost an hour. This was his daily homework. Even if the little girl wasn't here, he could casually throw a heavy object on the car, and he would be rocking it for several hours. At this moment, the expression on his face was somewhat gloomy. His wife, old Sue's wife, and a few others went to the streets to buy jewelry, and when they came back, it was as if they had changed into different people. The way they looked at him was a little strange. If he hadn't sneaked away early, he would have been chased out of the house by his wife with a broom in hand, just like old Sue. Could it be that she found out that I hid some money to buy bracelets for Little Red? Just as Fong was panicking, a few servant girls in the residence also gathered together and whispered, I heard that women can only have children after the age of 16. Is that true? A servant girl gossiped. Another servant girl curled her lips and said, Nonsense. I have a distant cousin who got married at the age of 13 and gave birth a few months later. Is it okay? I heard that it's not good for women to have children too early, and it's easy for them to suffer from chronic diseases, a servant girl said. That servant girl shook her head and said, The chronic diseases didn't. It's just that she died because of a difficult birth. Xiaofan hid behind them with a pale face. Hearing this, she couldn't listen anymore. She coughed lightly and said, What are you all doing here? Hurry up and go to work. If you continue to be lazy, your pay will be deducted. The servant girls were already familiar with this lady's servant girl and knew that she was just scaring them. Xiao Qing, who was bold, went over and whispered, Sister Xiaohuan, when do you think our Lord Zhu will take you in as a concubine? What are you talking about? Xiaohuan's pretty face blushed. She grabbed the corner of her clothes and said shyly, I will only be 16 in a few months. Her Royal Highness was grounded in the Morning Dew Hall and couldn't step out of the hall. Li Yi stood at the door of the Morning Dew Hall. When he was about to enter, he was stopped by the guards at the door. Apologies, County Uncle Li. Her Royal Highness is still grounded. No one can enter. The guard's attitude towards him was still very good. Can't you make an exception? Li Yi took out the Secret Intelligence Division sign and said, Apologies, sir. This subordinate really can't let you in. The guard smiled bitterly. All right then. Li Yi waved his hand. He was only a small guard and considered his subordinate. It was better not to make things difficult for him. Not long after, the guard's expression was troubled. Princess, Her Royal Highness, you? The proud Lolita raised her little face and said, I can't go in. Yes. The guard weighed in his heart whether he could afford to offend this young lady or not. In the next moment, he immediately nodded. His Majesty only grounded the eldest princess. He didn't say that others couldn't visit. In principle, even if he let Princess Shaoning in, it wouldn't be disobeying orders. As soon as he turned around, he saw Li Yi, who had his arms crossed and was looking at him with a mocking expression. Grounded? Li Yi looked at the guard. No one can go in? The guard's face was full of embarrassment. Seeing that Li Yi had already walked into the hall, he hurriedly said, Sir, you can't take this wine in. Is this wine? Li Yi glanced at him and said, This is a new perfume. It's for Her Royal Highness to try. The guard watched him walk in, and his expression became even more bitter. With such a prodigal woman at home, when would she release a new perfume? What flavor it would be, how much it would cost, and how much he could save from the membership price. Didn't he know? Besides, who would use a wine jar to contain perfume? To say the least, he was carrying something wrapped in lotus leaves in his other hand. The fragrance could be smelled from afar. Who would dare to say that it wasn't the beggar's chicken that was popular in the capital a few days ago? In the spacious courtyard of the rear hall of the Morning Dew Hall, Princess Royal Highness was dressed in a slim suit, which undoubtedly revealed her exquisite figure. Even Li Yi couldn't see the sword dance in her hand. Her movements were smooth and casual, and she didn't seem to be grounded at all. Seeing Li Yi come in, she put down her sword and walked straight over. She took the wine jar in his hand, opened it, and raised her head to drink it. It's not easy to take egg fried rice. Just make do with it. Li Yi tore off a chicken leg and handed it to her. The other one had already been snatched by the proud Lolita. Since she learned from Li Yi that she wouldn't get fat no matter how much she ate these days, her mouth was rarely idle. Chapter 521. Next time, bring egg fried rice. The princess was not satisfied with the combination of beggar's chicken and liquor. She raised her head and took another sip, then tilted her head and said to Li Yi, There won't be a next time. Li Yi thought to himself, what kind of taste is egg fried rice and liquor? He wiped the grease off his hands and said, Scholar Han fell ill, not because of you but because of anger. Yesterday afternoon, nearly 100 women blocked the gate of Han's house. The leading old woman said that Scholar Han killed her daughter and sat on the threshold of Han's house and cried for 2 hours. Everyone in the capital knew about it. After what happened in the court spread, the gate of Han's house was splashed with feces, and the wall was painted with Old Thief Han and Traitor of the Nation. Disregarding the lives of women. This alone can make his reputation plummet, and even his students have nothing to do with him. If it weren't for the intervention of the government, I'm afraid that even the gate of Han's house would have been torn down. Scholar Han fell ill last night. I heard that he almost couldn't breathe. The name of old thief Han has been confirmed. Now all the women in the capital are trying to ask His Majesty to pardon you. Li Yi told Mingzu all the developments from yesterday to today. The whole capital, from the government to the people, saw the power of women for the first time. It turned out that they were not as weak as they looked on the surface, and they also had the ability to stir up a storm. Li Yi did not expect this matter to have such a dramatic development. In fact, the brothel only told the people the truth. There was no embellishment, nor any artistic manipulation. The biggest effect was to let the people know the truth in the shortest time possible. Splashing feces at the door and spraying paint on the wall. Who came up with this idea? They didn't even need to be taught. Women had always been a weak group and were bound by women's morality. Not to mention marriage. Many people didn't even have freedom. Of course, there were some fierce women, but in general it was a fact that women were weak. And this was also a tradition for thousands of years. It was determined by productivity. Men were noble, and women had to lower their heads and serve their husbands and children for a lifetime. Perhaps even most women themselves thought so. This concept had not been completely reversed even in the later generations where men and women were equal. However, where there was oppression, there would be resistance. Especially after being oppressed for a long time, when the resistance came, it would be especially intense. It wasn't easy for someone to stand up for women. All the women had been hoping that the princess would really do something for them. After being stirred up by great scholar Han, everyone's anger erupted. Hundreds and thousands of years of repression erupted, and something called women's rights began to awaken. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer just a matter of early marriage. Mingzu put down the wine jar and wiped her mouth in a magnanimous manner. Having such a stubborn old man in the imperial court will only bring more harm than good. At this moment, the imperial court is probably in an uproar. Not only the ordinary women, but the women of the noble families are also complaining. They are all going to the empress to remonstrate. Some of the concubines even reported the matter to the Empress Dowager. Even the Empress Dowager, who has been cultivating Buddhism for a long time, specially sent a decree to ask His Majesty. Li Yi looked at her and said, "If this continues, I'm afraid it won't end well." This was all what Li Yi heard on the way here. It was already a big matter to use a knife against an official in the imperial court, and it involved the eldest princess. Coupled with the chaos of the Han family yesterday, it would be a wonder if the imperial court was peaceful today. Did you really not do what happened to the Han family? The eldest princess glanced at him and said. Li Yi was stunned for a moment and said angrily, "Do I look like that kind of person?" "It doesn't matter. I'm not blaming you." Her Highness patted his shoulder and said, "It's all that Han guy's fault." "Thank you." Li Yi's guess was right. Today, the imperial court was indeed not peaceful. It was not only Emperor Jing who had a headache. Now that things had developed to this point, the officials also felt a headache. In just one day, the entire capital was in chaos. Rumors were everywhere, and the people were angry. How His Majesty punished the eldest princess was no longer the important point. The important point was that if this went on, something big would happen. An old man held a ceremonial tablet and said righteously, "Your Majesty, the eldest princess has no regard for the law. In the imperial court, she publicly committed violence and assassinated an official in front of the civil and military officials and His Majesty. This behavior is so vile that it will not appease the people if she is not severely punished." All the officials shook their heads. Even now, he was still holding on to this matter. Did this old man not understand the situation? Great scholar Han had already been cursed by the people. The problem now was not how to punish the eldest princess, but how to appease the people's anger. Great scholar Han's words yesterday had completely pushed the imperial court to the opposite side of the people. The purpose of women's existence was to give birth? The lives of women were not important? Otherwise, why would the imperial court insist on early marriage and early childbirth, knowing that women could easily die from dystocia if they married early? Did the imperial court not see women as human beings? No one could take the blame for this. They could not, and His Majesty could not. Now it was only the capital. After a few days, when the news spread to the other counties, the impact would be even greater. At that time, it would really be chaos. Didn't he see that even the imperial censors had calmed down and didn't mention the matter of the eldest princess anymore? At this delicate moment, if this old official still couldn't understand the situation, then official Han would be a good example. Deputy Minister Ma stood in the crowd and lowered his head in silence. Not only him, but all the censors in the imperial censor had been given a death order. Today, in the imperial court, they were not allowed to mention the eldest princess again. He knew the situation in the capital better than anyone else. After this matter, great scholar Han's reputation could be said to be ruined. The status of the eldest princess in the hearts of the people of the capital, especially the women, had long reached a new height. Whoever held on to this matter would be like great scholar Han, nailed to the pillar of shame by the people of the capital. He did not want to experience the feeling of being hated by the people a second time. Just when the court officials were abnormally quiet, a figure walked out. Your Majesty, the only thing we can do now is to appease the people first, then we can discuss other things. Prime Minister Qin raised his head and slowly said. Prime Minister Qin's words are reasonable. I second it. The old man who had just spoken had long been forgotten. After Prime Minister Qin took the lead, the court officials stood up one after another. They avoided talking about the eldest princess and pulled the topic back to the main point they should be concerned about. Emperor Jing took a deep breath. Regarding this matter, my dear officials, do you have any suggestions? I think that the eldest princess's remonstrance yesterday was very reasonable. Prime Minister Qin said, although it is important to increase the population, we cannot disregard the lives of women because of this. Moreover, Her Highness has already given us a way to solve both problems. The people of the capital are already angry, and the implementation of this system cannot be delayed. Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen were the heads of all the officials. Prime Minister Shen was low-key and rarely spoke out unless it was a big matter. Most of the officials followed Prime Minister Qin. Following the Prime Minister, they would not make a big political mistake, right? As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, countless people agreed. Seeing that everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding to avoid the eldest princess, it was indeed not the right time to mention it again. Emperor Jing, who originally wanted to easily let this matter go, had no choice but to suppress this idea. Chapter 522. In the morning dew hall, when the arrogant Lolita tore off a small piece of chicken and insisted on stuffing it into Li Yi's mouth, Li Xian strode in, and his face did not look very good. How's the situation in the court? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Li Xian was not surprised to see Li Yi here. He said with a slightly angry tone, postpone the age of marriage for women to 16 years old, encourage women of the right age to have more children, urge the Imperial Physician Bureau to improve the method of midwifery, and train professional midwives. These are settled and will be implemented soon. Li Yi thought that in this way, with the help of this trend, he could open a high-end confinement club in the capital. Wouldn't he make a lot of money? However, these things that Li Xian just said were what Her Royal Highness wanted to do. There was no reason for the court to implement the policy. Li Xian still had the same expression. Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, the princess's house arrest? Li Xian said angrily, no one has mentioned it for the time being. I'm afraid that when this storm is over, they will still not give up easily. Her Royal Highness took great credit for this matter. In the final analysis, it was also because of this matter that Her Royal Highness almost hacked great scholar Han to death in the court. It was a major event related to the people's livelihood, and it was decided in this way. However, it was a bit like burning the bridge after crossing the river. But thinking about it, it was normal. After all, Her Royal Highness was the first to hack people in the Golden Hall with a knife. It was unprecedented, and probably no one would do it in the future. If they did not punish her severely, and someone followed her example in the future, wouldn't the officials' heads be hung on their belts when they went to the court? In this case, I can only add more fuel to the fire. Li Yi stopped the arrogant Lolita from stuffing the chicken butt into his mouth and thought so. What do you think about this matter? Li Xian sat down and looked at Li Yi and asked. Mingzhu's expression did not change, but her eyes were looking at him as well. As one of the three pests of the capital, the three heroes, the most sinister and cunning among the three heroes of the capital, Li Yi thought for a bit, looked at Mingzhu, and said seriously, how about I bring you a bowl of egg fried rice next time? The capital had not been peaceful for the past 2 days. County Magistrate Liu, who had just been promoted to the capital magistrate not long ago, was having a headache. Just now, a yamen runner came to report that there were two in-laws in the eastern part of the city fighting over their children's marriage, and the matter was brought to court. Since yesterday, this was already the fifth case of in-laws turning against each other. The cause of the case was surprisingly the same. The bride said that her daughter was too young and wanted to wait for 2 to 3 years before getting married. Naturally, the groom did not agree. The betrothal gifts had already been given, and they were just waiting for the bride to marry. What was the meaning of delaying the marriage for 2 to 3 years? If the news got out, where would they put their faces? The bride also had a legitimate reason. The imperial court had said that 3 out of 10 women would not survive if they gave birth at the age of 13. My daughter is only 13 this year. If you want my daughter to marry the groom, it is equivalent to asking my daughter to die. No matter what, she is my daughter. If anyone wants to hurt her, I will scratch him to death. County Magistrate Liu touched the fingernail mark on his neck and gasped in pain. This was the result of the fight between the two families in the court yesterday. He went up to persuade the two families, but was accidentally scratched by the shrew. At night, when he was being intimate with his wife, he explained for a long time. He didn't know why, but she, who was always reasonable, became extremely grumpy these days. Not only did she not believe him, but she also framed him by saying that it was the evidence of him going out to flirt. County Magistrate Liu had no choice but to scratch himself again to show his innocence. Even now, it was still burning. He began to miss the days when Liu Yi was here. How could he deal with such a small matter? The imperial court is about to issue a law. From now on, women in our Jing kingdom can only get married at the age of 16. Those who violate this law are disobeying the imperial court and the law. Ordinary people couldn't stand this kind of intimidation. After saying these words, the groom left dejectedly. The bride, on the other hand, beamed with joy and shouted that she was just and honorable, which slightly comforted County Magistrate Liu. He let out a long sigh. From the perspective of justice, the imperial court's action was good, but the real trouble was just beginning. Delaying the earliest date for a woman to get married at the age of 16 also meant that those poor families also had to raise their daughters to the age of 16. For them, this undoubtedly increased a lot of burden. How many of those people at the bottom of the social ladder would treat their daughters as real people? The imperial court's action was still thoughtless. Not only that, besides the unstable feelings of the people, there were also some aspects of the capital that had become somewhat abnormal. Behind the chaos, there seemed to be an invisible hand pushing things forward, causing people to be alarmed. The inexplicable disappearance of people in the capital, the abnormalities of several dozen families in a village outside the city, the mysterious divine empress. Returning to the rear hall, County Magistrate Liu paced back and forth for almost an hour. He didn't even pay attention to the concubine that came to him of her own accord. After thinking for a while, he raised his brush and began to write on a booklet. The matter of the divine empress appearing a few days ago has already been widely spread among the believers, causing them to be even more pious. In an ordinary courtyard outside the capital, a purple-clothed man had a faint expression of excitement on his face. He said to the middle-aged Taoist nun, "In these past 2 days, my religion has gained more than 100 believers. From this, it seems that the great rise of the holy religion is just around the corner." Very good. The middle-aged Taoist nun nodded and said, "But we can't be too ostentatious. This is the capital. If we were to arouse the alarm of the Jing Kingdom's imperial court, there would be countless troubles. This subordinate understands." The purple-clothed man bowed and said these words. Then he thought of a certain matter and said, "Reporting to the Empress, this subordinate has discovered a disciple that has recently entered the religion. His ability is extremely outstanding. Half of the newly increased believers are due to his efforts. He is also a person who witnessed the Divine Empress's second appearance. This subordinate wishes to promote him to the position of yellow-clothed emissary. What does the Empress think? For such a small matter, you can decide for yourself. As for the Assembly of Heroes, continue to pay attention to it." After saying these words, the middle-aged Taoist nun floated away. The purple-clothed man bowed and said, "Respectfully sending off the Empress. I and you will share the same bed as you and we will die in the same hole." The young imperial censor called Wan Su was humming a tune he had just learned from a brothel. As he walked into the house, he saw his wife dressed neatly and about to leave with a maid. His expression changed and he hurriedly said, "I am my wife, you can't continue fooling around with those people." The matters of Her Highness the Princess are none of our business. The woman opposite him waved her hand and said, I'm not going. Rui Workshop released a new perfume today. I'm going to take a look. Wansu heaved a sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't going to ask for advice on behalf of the princess, it was fine. If she was going to Rui Workshop to buy perfume, then he would buy it. His eyes widened. There's a new perfume? The young imperial censor's face revealed a sorrowful expression. His salary had just been issued this month. AI, forget it. If she wants to buy it, then buy it. As long as she doesn't get involved in that matter, it's fine. Anyway, I like the smell of it. He could only comfort her like this in his heart. He squeezed out a smile on his face and said, Then, my wife, go early and come back early. Are you going to leave just like this? Never see each other again? The young imperial censor hummed a tune as he regretted his diminishing salary. There's a new show in the brothel? The woman didn't leave and looked at him as she asked. Oh yes. Wansu turned around and nodded his head. What's it called? The woman asked again as she was about to board the carriage. Wansu thought for a moment and said, I think it's called Peacock Flies Southeast. Yes, Peacock Flies Southeast. Wansu nodded his head and said with absolute certainty. Note, the tune Imperial Censor Wan is humming is an excerpt from the U opera, Peacock Flies Southeast. Chapter 523. Have you been to the Jade Yard recently? No, what's wrong? Is there a new girl in the Jade Yard? There's no new girl, but there are a lot of new styles. It's a pity that you didn't go. Tell me, my husband went back to his parents' home today. I'll go and have a look tonight. Tiske. What the girls in the Jade Yard are wearing now is called seductive. Do you know, they don't wear undergarments now, that's called bras. Oh no, I have to buy some for my wife. Li Yi was a little stunned when he saw two young men deliberately raising their voices to discuss something on the street, attracting the attention of many people in the same field. Who hired these actors? Their acting skills were poor, exaggerated, and their lines were not deep at all. Could they be any more fake? When he was thinking about this, he saw a man suddenly came up and said in surprise, Brother, are you talking about the most popular new underwear in the capital recently? To be honest, I also want to buy a set for my wife, but I don't know where to buy it. Brother, I'm sure you're a kindred spirit. Then I won't hide it from you. The man who spoke just now smiled and said, Go straight along this road, turn left at the first intersection, turn right at the second intersection, and walk for another 10 feet or so. You'll see that shop. But only women can enter that shop. Brother, remember to bring your wife. Oh, thank you, brother. Young master, what are they talking about? Xiaofan blinked and asked. Children shouldn't ask so many questions. Let's go and watch the play. Li Yi said as he patted her head. I'm not young anymore. The servant girl lowered her head to look at herself and muttered. Then, she quickly followed after the servant girl. Seeing that more and more people gathered there, Li Yi was surprised. The underwear reform was really carried out by her, but the marketing method was a little low. Maybe she would only realize it after suffering some losses. Passing by the shop mentioned by the man just now, he saw that the line of women outside the shop was already 3 to 5 feet long. Each of them was gorgeously dressed, and they were even throwing flirtatious glances at the men passing by, constantly urging the people in front of them to hurry up. At the door of the shop stood a woman who was even stronger than Fong. She was the one who blocked him outside the workshop and refused to let him enter. Just now, she had said that she might suffer a loss. She did not expect the shop's business to be so good. Her old face was burning with pain. She pulled Xiaofan away quickly. If she stayed for a while longer, she might enter the shop to take a look. It didn't take long for him to realize that the majority of those people were women from brothels. Women from ordinary families wouldn't be so bold as to openly buy those shameful and intimate items. The brothels probably had no choice but to improve their core competitiveness because of the Jade Yard. If they lost to others in certain aspects, as time went on, they wouldn't have enough fame, and the brothels would lose. Although the price of those small pieces of cloth was a little expensive, it couldn't stop the customers from liking them. To listen to the opera, they naturally had to listen to the most popular opera of the past few days, The Peacock Flies Southeast. The The popularity of the brothel could be seen from the fact that the tickets for each show were sold out. There were a few standard brothels. Other than the ordinary shows, there was also a VIP area for women. The tickets for the VIP area were slightly more expensive, but the service was more attentive. In the summer, they provided free smoothies and cold drinks. As for the women's area, it was only recently opened. There was a difference between men and women, especially for women. They couldn't squeeze in with so many men in a crowded place. The one who first suggested this idea was Ruoqing. Among the women, there were actually quite a few who liked to listen to opera. They were more emotional, and they were more partial to operas that depicted love, like The Cowherd and the Weaver Girl and The Peacock Flies Southeast. When Li Yi and Xiaofan walked into the brothel, they saw many women with masks covering their faces coming in and out. From their clothes, they didn't look like ordinary people. Today, Rui was invited by the Crown Princess. These few days, they had a lot of gatherings. Naturally, Mississippi Lu was busy every day. Even Yongning was invited to stay in the palace for 2 days by the old emperor. In her boredom, she could only bring Xiao Huan out to watch the opera. The Peacock Flies Southeast was a recent opera. It was about the Eastern Han Dynasty. The talented and beautiful Lu Longji and Lu River's petty official Jiao Zhongqing were sincerely in love. However, her mother-in-law, Jiao Zhongqing, was not able to bear a child for 2 to 3 years. Lu Longji resolutely asked to return. Jiao Zhongqing's pleas to her mother were in vain. The couple could only bid farewell, and both of them swore that heaven would not betray each other. After Lu Longji returned home, her evil brother forced her to marry. Helpless, she agreed to marry the governor's son. Jiao Zhongqing rushed over when he heard the news. The couple promised to meet in the netherworld. On the day of Longji's wedding, Lu Longji raised her body to the pond of purity, and Jiao Zhongqing hung himself on the southeast branch. Both husband and wife died for love. Before the opera began, an old storyteller first read The Peacock Flies Southeast in a hoarse and sorrowful voice. On the day the cows and horses neighed, the bride entered the green hut. After dusk, the people settled down. My life ends today, my corpse remains. She took off her dress and shoes, raising her body to the pond of purity. When the official heard this, he knew that they would be parting for a long time. Wandering under the garden tree, hanging himself on the southeast branch. Before the opera began, Xiao Huan was already hugging Li Yi's arm and sobbing softly. Young master, Longji is so pitiful. That old granny, why is she so bad? A good love story. Shouldn't the ending be 2 people getting back together again and living happily for the rest of their lives? One raised her body to the pond of purity, the other hung himself on the southeast branch. It was really pitiful. Li Yi patted the little servant girl's shoulder to comfort her. It was a little pitiful, but there was nothing he could do. If it wasn't pitiful, how could he move more people? If it wasn't pitiful, how could he cause many women to reflect on their own status and have the slightest desire to rebel against feudal ethics and feudal etiquette? If it wasn't pitiful, how could this fire burn even brighter? It was said that scholars were mostly angry youths. They dared to write anything, especially novels and plays. There was no lack of rebellious people. The scale was so big that it made people speechless. He didn't know what this nameless person was thinking. Did she think that the recent period was not too sensitive? What was her intention in writing such a thing? Was she not afraid of being checked? Was she trying to expose the man-eating nature of feudal etiquette and passionately praise Lu Longji and Jiao Zhongqing's loyalty to love and rebellious spirit of resisting oppression? Or was she trying to express the people's passionate yearning for the freedom of love and marriage? Especially when she created Lu Longji, a typical image of an ancient woman who had reached the peak of being loyal to her family but could only meet a tragic end. She hinted at the tragic fate of women in feudal society. What would the women who watched the opera think? Li Yi sighed and said, "She has ulterior motives, ulterior motives." Chapter 524. The laws of the Jing Kingdom did not convict people based on words. As long as one did not seek death to the point of inciting rebellion, writing about the current emperor and General Su Dingyuan Longyang, or fabricating some kind of impure rumor to deliberately smear the reputation of important officials of the court, the government would not care. Furthermore, because of their profession, they could be more open-minded in places like the brothels. They could ridicule the imperial court or criticize the country's policies. No one would care about that. Some black-hearted brothels even deliberately used false rumors as a gimmick to attract customers. However, no matter how arrogant they were, they would always have scruples. Even if they really wanted to express their thoughts, they would be very vague. John Doe was very insidious. He simply wanted to see the world in chaos. By writing such plays, it was obvious that he wanted to stir up the emotions of the women in the capital. Behind this, even Li Yi himself would not believe that there was no conspiracy behind it. It was said that he anonymously submitted 2 plays to Old Sun yesterday. One was called Romance of the Western Chamber, and the other seemed to be called The Peony Pavilion. They both reflected the rebellious phenomenon of young women breaking the shackles of feudal ethics and pursuing freedom and love. On a deeper level, it would probably arouse the women to reflect on their status in society. Maybe a vigorous women's rights movement would appear. With such a grand scheme, what was the intention of this John Doe? As the big boss behind the brothels, a good citizen of the Jing Kingdom, and one of the top 10 outstanding youths of the country in the second year of the Jinghe period, could he spread such plays that disturb the stability of the country and destroy the harmony of society, and let the evil plan of the John Doe succeed? The answer was obvious. Xiaofan wiped her tears while listening to the play. In the women's theater next door, there was also a play called The Peacock Flies to the Southeast. There were almost no empty seats in the hall. It was unknown how many women recalled their love that had died before it had even sprouted. Under the curtains, their eyes were already full of tears. Lu Longji's tragic fate resonated with many people. As women, was their fate destined to be like this? Her Royal Highness was the first to stand up for women. But now, Her Royal Highness was imprisoned in the palace, and even the most basic freedom was taken away. After Her Royal Highness, who would think for women? Should they maintain the status quo or strive to fight for something that should belong to them? Countless women fell into confusion. This Lu Dayou is also somewhat talented. Emperor Jing opened a memorial, looked at it, and nodded. If I remember correctly, he should have been the Anxi County magistrate before. Chengde nodded and said, yes, Lu Dayou was the former Anxi County magistrate. He was transferred to the capital a few months ago. Anxi County is full of talents. First, there was Lu Yi, and now there is Lu Dayou. County Magistrate Jing Lu. Emperor Jing boasted a little and said, the court officials are good at making decisions on important matters and overseeing the overall situation. It is inevitable that there will be omissions in these areas. Although Li Yi had long reminded me, other than him, only Lu Dayou thought of this point. So, according to what he said, this law will be enforced in Jingdo. In the other provinces and counties, the force will be slightly lighter. With that, he began to draft the edict. Suddenly, a figure walked in from outside the hall. Chengde opened his mouth and was about to speak, but the woman waved her hand. He immediately closed his mouth and left without a trace. Emperor Jing finished drafting the imperial edict and found that the surrounding atmosphere was a bit strange. When he looked up, he said in surprise, why is the Empress here? The beautiful woman dressed in palace attire and wearing a phoenix crown looked at Emperor Jing and said directly, Your Majesty, when do you plan to release Mingzu? Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, the time is not right. I'm afraid that she will have to endure for a few more days. The beautiful woman frowned and said, what did Mingzu do wrong? She just wanted to do something for the women of the world. Mingzu is already suffering. If Your Majesty makes things difficult for her, I will not agree. Emperor Jing said, when did I make things difficult for her? She is in the morning dew hall every day. She has wine to drink and meat to eat. Other than not being able to go out, her life is much better than mine. I just want to tell Your Majesty that if you still don't release Mingzu, Your Majesty will have a headache. The beautiful woman said one more sentence and then turned to leave. Emperor Jing shook his head. Of course, Mingzu had to be released, but he had to wait a few more days. When the heat of the matter died down, it would be much easier. If he brought it up now, there would probably be countless voices of opposition in the court. Your Majesty, in recent days, the public sentiment in Jingdo has become more and more serious. There are even women who have formed organizations. Although we have not seen them do anything, we cannot sit idly by. In the political hall, a supervising imperial censor was reporting the situation in Jingdo to Emperor Jing. Aren't we already preparing to issue a new law? Why is it like this? A few officials furrowed their brows and asked. The supervising imperial censor was depressed and wondered why such a situation had occurred. How would he know? He also felt that after the court issued the law, the hearts of the people in Jingdo would stabilize. Those women would certainly be grateful to the court and no longer be angry. Who would have thought that the matter was becoming more and more serious? Now, it was no longer just a problem of women. No one knew who it was, but the streets and alleys of Jingdo were covered with small notes. There were only a few short sentences on them, such as, "Women can hold up half the sky." "Relying on a man can only be a princess, relying on oneself can be an empress." The empress had appeared. Were they going to rebel? Of course, the empress was just a metaphor. This was not important. What was important was that Jingdo was becoming more and more chaotic. A certain man who often beat his wife was found on the street this morning. His face was bruised and swollen, and his original appearance could not be recognized. He could only tremble and continuously say, "Heroine, have mercy." A 7-foot man now subconsciously avoided women when he saw them. It was likely that he would never be a man again in this life. A certain imperial censor who had impeached the princess returned home after a busy day. From his mother to his daughter, no one gave him a good look. There was not even rice in the pot. With great difficulty, he found 2 cold steamed buns to appease his hunger. He went to bed and wanted to be intimate with his wife. However, he was kicked off the bed. His wife was the daughter of a famous family. Although he was the head of the family, his status was only slightly higher than that of the family's dog. He could only be angry when he was kicked. That kick was really painful. A certain imperial censor rubbed his waist and continued, "As of this morning, nearly 1,000 women have signed a petition for Her Royal Highness. Her Royal Highness is sharing the country's worries. In a moment of desperation, she has lost her etiquette in the court. It is pardonable. May I be so bold as to ask your Majesty to pardon the eldest princess?" Censor Lin's words are reasonable. "I ask your Majesty to pardon the eldest princess." I second that. Without a unified statement in advance, many court officials came out one after another to plead for Her Royal Highness to be pardoned. If great scholar Han had been beheaded, then so be it. Who asked him to not watch his mouth? These few days, the women in the family would disappear from the house from time to time. They did not know what mysterious activities they were doing. Their wives treated them coldly, and their daughters simply ignored them. Later, they found out that they were preparing to organize a group to plead for Her Royal Highness to pardon the eldest princess. Pleading was a common thing, but since ancient times, how could there be a woman who did this? Even if they ignored this matter, the family was still in a mess these few days. If Her Royal Highness was not released, they would really not be able to live on. Chapter 525. Pardon the eldest princess? Emperor Jing looked at the officials below and said, "Although Emingzu is the eldest princess, she committed murder in the Golden Palace. If she is not severely punished, I'm afraid it will not appease the people." The censor who was elected as the representative by the censorate secretly felt bitter. His Majesty was using their previous words to slap their faces. But at this time, he could only brace himself and say, "The officials saw what happened that day with their own eyes. It was the great scholar Han who was in the wrong first. As an official, how can we be disrespectful to Her Highness? Her Highness is wholeheartedly serving the country. It is understandable that she was impulsive. Moreover, His Majesty has already grounded the eldest princess. I think that if we severely punish the eldest princess because of this, I'm afraid it will chill the hearts of the officials who serve the country wholeheartedly." Censor Lin's words once again drew the agreement of countless officials. It was really that this matter was far beyond their expectations. If it was someone else who committed murder in the Golden Palace, they would have been beheaded long ago. But the eldest princess was the eldest princess after all. Even if great scholar Han was really killed, no one would think that the eldest princess would pay with her life, let alone a strand of her hair. At most, she would be stripped of her title. With His Majesty's love for the eldest princess, it would not take long for him to find another reason to restore it. But no matter what, their attitude had to be set. If even the Golden Palace could be so easily dealt with, what was the use of the law? However, who could have expected that the public opinion was almost one-sided? If it was only the people, it was fine. Even the daughters of the wealthy and officials had a strong reaction to this. They joined forces to petition His Majesty to pardon Her Highness the eldest princess. Some daughters of the prestigious families had even set up an organization called the Women's Union. This Women's Union was different from the Poetry Society and the like. Its purpose was to solve the difficulties of women. In recent days, they had vigorously promoted the matter of late marriage and late childbirth in the capital city. To some extent, it had saved a lot of effort for the court. Although Her Highness the eldest princess was still grounded in the palace, she was the first president that they had jointly elected. These days, she had been going around for the eldest princess's matter. Even the officials had a headache. Every single one of these women had a powerful background. The Wang clan and a few other large clans, families of generals, a few princesses, and even a few ministers of the imperial court had people from their families. This was a force that could not be easily shaken. Since all of you have said so, Emperor Jing looked thoughtful and said, Changda, go to the morning dew hall. You're out so soon? Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness who was standing in the courtyard in astonishment. It seemed that the officials in the court were even more impatient than he had imagined. Women's Union? Emingzu looked at him and asked, Is it your doing? What Women's Union? Li Yi looked back at Li Xian and asked, You did it. Li Xian shook his head. He had indeed done a lot of things these days, including encouraging the Wang clan and a few other large clans and families of generals to unite to put pressure on the imperial court. But this Women's Union really had nothing to do with him. It's a new organization established by some women from influential families in the capital. They said that they wanted to unite and do something for women. They elected me as the first president. I'm considering. When Emingzu hesitated, Li Yi waved his hand and said, What else is there to consider? You don't know what kind of position you have in the hearts of the women in the capital. No one is more suitable than you for this position. The president of the Women's Union was the patron saint of all the women in the Jing kingdom. She had a halo above her head. If she did more practical things for women, half of the world would fall to her side with a wave of her arm. Of course, it was impossible for her to start a vigorous feminist movement now. The concept of male superiority and female inferiority had been deeply rooted and could not be easily changed. In fact, even those women themselves, under the inspiration of the unknown man with ulterior motives, could only have some vague ideas in their hearts and could not be grasped. The establishment of the Women's Union was such a result. They still did not know the direction. They only knew that by doing this, they might be able to slightly change something. They did not dare to think about it before and had never thought about it. Now Her Royal Highness stood up and led them to take a big step forward. Maybe they could take a few more steps in the future. Really has nothing to do with you? Emingzu looked at Li Yi with a face full of doubt. I swear, it's definitely not me. Li Yi raised 4 fingers and pointed to the sky. If this really has anything to do with me, let me. As he spoke, he looked at Her Royal Highness. After a long time he put down his slightly sore arm, looked at Emingzu and asked, Why didn't you stop me? This was definitely not right. Logically speaking, when he was about to swear, Her Royal Highness should not have quickly covered his mouth and said with a touched face, Enough, I don't need you to swear, I believe you. Go ahead, I'm listening. Her Royal Highness crossed her arms and looked at him. Boring. Li Yi shook his head, stood up, and walked to the indoor playground at the side. Hey, Li Bingning, can't you just sit there quietly? Why are you playing the slide? Come down. Emingzu looked away from Li Yi's back and looked at Li Xian. Li Xian spread out his hands and said, It's definitely not me, but in my opinion, there is no harm for you to be the president. At least, it will be more convenient for you to do things in the future. After thinking for a moment, Emingzu finally nodded. Sigh, Detective Zhao, how can we stop singing just like that? The tickets have already been sold, the customers will have complaints. Inside the brothel, Old Sun looked at a man dressed like an official with a troubled expression. Sigh, Old Sun, this is what the higher-ups want, we are just following orders. The official with the surname Zhao sighed and said, The imperial court is already looking for that, Wu. Say, why don't you think about it, at this time, can this kind of show still be performed? Old Sun's expression changed and said, Detective Zhao, we don't know either, it is not allowed by the imperial court. Moreover, we bought it from someone else. I know. In all of the brothels in the capital, only you have the most conscience. You never spread rumors. Last time, in the case of Deputy Mayor Ma, it was you guys who helped to clear his name. Even the censorate praised you guys. The tile house in the west of the city, which was the first to perform this kind of show, has been completely sealed. Lord Lu specially instructed me not to make things difficult for you guys. Detective Zhao waved his hand and said, "Old son, don't worry, this matter is not your fault. If you want to blame someone, blame that Wu. I came to tell you that Romance of the Western Chamber, Peony Pavilion, and especially Peacock Flies Southeast, don't ever sing again." Got it, got it. Old son nodded repeatedly. All right, I will bring my brothers to other places to take a look. Detective Zhao waved his hand and turned to walk out of the brothel. Everything was fine, why aren't we allowed to sing anymore? Old son shook his head in pity. The tile house in the west of the city has been sealed, we can just buy it. Forget it, we will talk about this in the future. That Mulan should start rehearsing. Chapter 526. In the short span of a day, the Peacock Flies Southeast, the Peony Pavilion, and the Romance of the Western Chamber had completely disappeared from all the brothels in the capital. Even the handwritten scripts on the market had been forcibly confiscated by the officials. The commoners were naturally puzzled by the fact that they weren't even allowed to sell their scripts. However, the imperial court had never given them an explanation, so they were already used to it. In any case, there were plenty of plays in the brothels, so they could just watch something else. Sigh, I've gone all over the capital, but I still haven't been able to buy it. I'm going to get scolded by the young miss when I get back. A young servant girl wearing a green dress with her hair combed into two buns sighed as she walked along the road. Sigh, young miss, young miss. Suddenly, a voice rang out from beside her. The young servant girl turned around and saw a sneaky man waving at her from a corner of the wall. That man was ugly and extremely wretched. Thinking of what her mistress had said before, that in the capital, there were people who specialized in abducting and selling beautiful young girls like her, the young servant girl nervously retreated a few steps. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm and forcefully pulled her into a small alley on the side. Safe. She only managed to shout one word before her mouth was covered. It's over. The young girl's eyes immediately filled with tears when she thought of something extremely terrifying. Young Miss Chin, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again. Lower your voice, lower your voice. The voice of a man behind her was a little anxious. Sensing that the man had let go of her, the young servant girl immediately took 2 steps back and looked at the man warily. A lewd smile appeared on the face of the wretched man. He unbuttoned his clothes and walked step by step towards the young girl in the corner of the wall. What do you want? The young girl's voice trembled, and her large eyes were filled with endless fear. Young miss, don't be afraid. The man smiled lewdly as he tore open his clothes. Both sides of his clothes were filled with pockets, and in the pockets were many thin books. The man revealed a mysterious smile and said, Young miss, do you want books? The Romance of the Western Chamber, the Peony Pavilion, and the Peacock Flies Southeast, all have them. They're all uncut versions. The young girl's expression froze. A moment later, the man sent the young servant girl out with a smile and said fervently, Young miss, you can go ask around. My prices here are the lowest in the surrounding 18 streets. If you want to buy any other books, you can come find me here. If you want more than 10 books, I can even lower the price by 1 copper coin per book. That depends on how clear your copy is and how many mistakes there are. The little servant girl waved her hand and said, All right, if you still want to buy it, I will come here to find you. The girl carried the booklets like a thief and disappeared into the crowd in no time. I'm not allowed to sing anymore? Li Yi took a sip of tea and asked. Old son, who was sitting to the side, shook his head and said, Yes, the government just sent someone yesterday to say that Peacock Flies Southeast, Romance of the Western Chamber, and Peony Pavilion are not allowed to sing. If you don't want me to sing, then I won't sing. Li Yi waved his hand and didn't care at all. This incident was within his expectations. If it weren't for the incident with the princess, these 3 plays would at most be considered as skirting the boundaries in the current era. They were nothing in the brothel, and there were many other brothels that were even more ambitious than these. Unfortunately, the brothel just wanted to produce some new plays to attract customers, but they encountered such an incident. It was really unfortunate. Moreover, John Doe's goal should have already been achieved. Romance of the Western Chamber and the Peony Pavilion were also banned books in ancient times, but even Sister Dai Yu was obsessed with them.
Didn't the young ladies of the big families and noble ladies also have a copy of it, hiding it under their pillows in their rooms and secretly reading it when no one was around?
Old man's son asked with uncertainty. Then do we still want Mulan? Yes, of course.
Why not?
Li Yi looked at him and said, Who is Hua Mulan? She is loyal and filial, and joined the army on behalf of her father. She is a heroine. Didn't there have been plays about her in the past? We just want people to cherish the memory of heroes.
If they can be inspired by their moral integrity, learn to be brave and take on heavy responsibilities, not be greedy for high position and generous salary, serve the motherland, be brave and good at war, be filial to your parents, be brave and strong. That will also be excellent. Challenging feudal ethics and pursuing freedom of love were not allowed. This was very normal. If they had known that John Doe had such intentions, the brothel would not have fallen into his trap no matter what. However, since they were not allowed to do negative things, they could at least do something positive, right? The story of Hua Mulan, the heroine, had inspired countless people since ancient times. Although the dynasties had changed, there were still many dynasties that officially defined her as a national hero, and her story was widely spread. Although Her Royal Highness was a woman, she cared about the country. She was of noble birth. In order to understand the feelings of the people, she was willing to leave the palace and become a small constable. When the country's reputation was about to be damaged, she stepped forward bravely and risked her life to fight a grandmaster. Now she did not hesitate to be imprisoned in order to speak up for the women of the world and change the unhealthy atmosphere in society. What kind of spirit was this? This was the spirit of internationalism. This was humanitarianism. This was the spirit of patriotism. All the people of the Jing kingdom, regardless of gender, had to learn from her spirit of selflessness. From this point, they could become people who greatly benefited the people. A person's ability varied, but as long as they had this spirit, they would be a noble person, a pure person, a moral person, a person who was free from vulgar interests, and a person who was beneficial to the people. Her Royal Highness was such a person. Wasn't this the current Hua Mulan? No, Her Royal Highness had even more noble sentiments than Hua Mulan. It was not enough to just be Hua Mulan. When he had time, he would flip through the history books to see if there were any other national heroines who were not inferior to men. Heroes should receive the glory that belonged to them, and should not exist in the dusty history books. You're right, sir.
Old Sun looked enlightened. You're really thoughtful, sir. I'll go back and urge them to hurry up and rehearse. Also, I'm afraid that this kind of play will be more popular among the women. When that time comes, we should add a few more women's performances. Fong was arm wrestling with Princess Shanning's guards on the stone table in the courtyard. It was a 1v5. All 5 of them were red in the face, but he still looked relaxed. The arrogant Lolita was so angry that she kept complaining that her guards were useless. She stopped watching and ran to the side with Yong Ning to play on the swing. After watching Old Sun leave, Li Yi stood in the courtyard and let out a long sigh of relief. After all, this was a feudal society. To be able to do this was already the best that could be achieved. The concept of men being superior to women had existed since ancient times. With the development of history, the status of women became lower and lower. However, it did not fall in a straight line. There would always be some ups and downs. During the Tang dynasty, the status of women had reached its peak in the past few hundred years. Divorce was common. Not many people would criticize a woman for not following the virtues of a woman if she rode a horse and hit a ball in public. It was even more so in the palace. There were countless love triangles and quartet relationships. Of course, the elegance of the women of the Tang dynasty was not something that the women of the Jing kingdom could envy. However, they were still the continuation of the Tang dynasty, so they could always inherit some of the style of their predecessors. This was especially reflected among the nobles. She stole a glance at Li Yi and rushed into the kitchen before Rui. Li Yi rubbed his eyebrows helplessly. He turned around and looked at the guards who were arm wrestling with Fong. He said angrily, "What are you all doing? Don't you want your heads anymore? And you, don't think that I won't scold you just because you're old. Why did His Majesty send you all here? What do you mean by standing at the door all day and dozing off?" They didn't even know what their duties were. What kind of security team was sent by the old emperor? The guards immediately stood up. The eyes of the gray-robed old man at the door twitched. It took him a lot of effort to calm down the raging true energy in his heart. Your wife is watching from the side. How could anything happen to Her Highness? Besides, Princess Xiaoning has decided to do something. Do you dare to stop her? Lu Dayou, the magistrate of the capital, was very happy today. He was singled out and praised by His Majesty in front of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. He even received a lot of rewards. Looking at the envious eyes of the big shots who were usually more powerful than him, he felt as if he had drunk a bowl of iced sour plum soup on a hot day. He thought that he would only be able to guard the small piece of land in Anqi County for the rest of his life. He would be able to retire peacefully when he was old. When he was 60, he would have a big house with dozens of acres of land for retirement. He would have filial children and grandchildren. He would never run out of money. He could even have fun with his beautiful concubine every noon. These were not too much to ask for, were they? But he never thought that when he was middle-aged, he would seem to be bewitched. His good luck was so good that even he was afraid. First, his Anqi County had a good reputation and was rated as an advanced and civilized county in the country. He was also inexplicably promoted from Qing'an Prefecture to the capital and to the center of power. Although he was only a small county magistrate, he was able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital at his age. It was hard to say what position he would be promoted to in the future. Initially, he thought that as long as he did his job conscientiously, he would be able to catch His Majesty's eye as he was familiar with the way things were done in Anqi County. In any case, he was familiar with the way things were done in Anqi County. But who would have thought that after such a short time, before he had even warmed his seat, he would be summoned by His Majesty and come to the court for a one-day tour. When he returned to the county government, His Majesty's imperial edict and rewards had arrived. Because he was an outsider, he would be ostracized by the county magistrate and others from time to time. When he received the imperial edict just now, he saw that the county magistrate's face was pale with fear. Naturally, he felt proud in his heart. When he came out of the imperial palace just now, Lord Dong also praised him and said many words of encouragement. When Lord Dong was still the magistrate of Qing'an Prefecture, he was Anqi County magistrate. Now that he was working under Lord Dong, he could be considered to have a backer. As the son-in-law of Prime Minister Shen and a person highly valued by His Majesty, Lord Dong's official career would certainly not be limited to a mere capital magistrate. This was not the only happy event recently. That good-for-nothing boy of his had worked hard and actually passed the entrance examination of the School of Mathematics. His father would no longer have to worry about his future. Congratulations, Lord. Congratulations. County Magistrate Lu sat in the hall and took a sip of tea. Then, a person walked in from outside the door and came forward to congratulate him with a happy face. County Magistrate Lu waved his hand. Although this Detective Zhao was far inferior to Lu Yidong, he was exquisite and could be considered a talent. He was one of the few confidants he had. County Magistrate Lu asked, "How is it going?" Detective Zhao immediately cupped his hands and said, "Don't worry, Lord. I have already gone to all the brothels in the capital. There are no more brothels performing those plays. The handwritten copies sold on the streets have all been brought back to be destroyed." County Magistrate Lu took another sip of tea and said, "The court has been paying close attention to this matter these days. You have to keep an eye on it. If there are any discoveries, do not let it go." "Yes, I understand." Detective Zhao revealed a hesitant expression and said, "Lord, although we have done a good job on the surface, there are still some people secretly peddling copies. They cannot be completely banned. Their movements are secretive, and it is impossible to completely ban them." "It is enough to do a good job on the surface," County Magistrate Lu said as he stood up. That nameless person with ulterior motives had used these sensitive dramas to incite the women of the capital, which was why the capital had been in chaos a few days ago. Now that Her Highness had been released from house arrest, even if those dramas were still being circulated in a small circle, they wouldn't be able to cause any more waves. County Magistrate Lu curled his lips as he walked out of the door. Those plays were a bunch of nonsense. They said that women should pursue free love, which violated the etiquette and the law. Fortunately, his daughter had been at home all the time and was not poisoned by those dirty thoughts. However, he still had to listen to the Princess Royal Highness. Yun was only 14 years old this year. He had originally planned to arrange a marriage for her this year, but now it seemed that it would be better to postpone it for another 2 years. County Magistrate Lu walked to the door of his daughter's room and saw that it was unlocked. He wanted to knock on the door and enter,
but he saw his daughter leaning over the table and not moving for a long time. What are you doing? He walked in and asked with some doubt. Father, why are you here? Hearing the voice, the girl's expression changed and she hurriedly closed the book in her hand. County Magistrate Lu glanced at the book and saw the 3 big words, Romance of the Western Wing, on the cover. Chapter 527. It's over. It's over. Miss has been discovered. The girl named Xiaofan put her ear to the corner of the window and looked frightened. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. After a while, County Magistrate Lu came out of his daughter's room angrily and locked the door. Seeing the little maid standing by the window, he asked, Xiaofan, come here. The little maid trembled and came over. County Magistrate Lu threw the book Romance of the Western Wing on the ground and asked angrily, Tell me, how did Miss get this book? Master, I. Seeing County Magistrate Lu's angry look, the little maid trembled and couldn't say a word. Did young master give it to her? County Magistrate Lu suddenly frowned. This guy doesn't learn good things all day and only teaches his sister bad things. How dare he give her such a shameless book? I'll skin him alive. The little maid looked puzzled. Young master? It's really that brat. County Magistrate Lu's face darkened and he said, Keep a close eye on Miss and don't allow her to step out of the door. Brat, he's getting bolder and bolder. Oh. The little maid stood there in a daze with a silly expression. Dad, it's really not me. The young man leaned against the window and shouted, I've been studying mathematics at home these days. Dad. Let me out. Dad, I admit that I went to Jade Courtyard 2 days ago. But what happened to my sister has nothing to do with me. As County Magistrate Lu walked out of a moon-shaped door, the young man's voice gradually disappeared. All of them have grown up. County Magistrate Lu's face was livid. His daughter watched that kind of indecent drama and his son went to a brothel. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed that he, as a father, was not strict with his children. He had been busy with official affairs these days and indeed neglected to discipline them. Hey, where did Lord Lu go? Detective Zhao looked around the county government office with a puzzled expression. Until he saw a figure coming from the arched door. He hurried to greet him and said, Lord? What's the matter? Say it. County Magistrate Lu had a belly full of anger and had nowhere to vent it, so he said coldly, Detective Zhao was startled. He knew that something was wrong with Lord Lu. If he had known earlier, he would have kept a low profile for a while. But now, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. He carefully said, Sir, in the city, the brothel in the city has a new show today. It's called Mulan. Hua Mulan? Lord Lu raised his eyebrows and said, Why is it a woman again? What do they want? Didn't I say that we are not allowed to sing these kinds of nonsense? Now that he heard things related to women, he was annoyed, so he naturally spoke with some anger. In that case, I'll tell them that they're not allowed to sing this song either. Detective Zhao probed. County Magistrate Lu said coldly, You're not allowed to sing. If anyone sings in a brothel again, bring him back. Then he added, if it's old son, try to persuade him. All right, I'll go now. Detective Zhao nodded. I'll take my leave. He turned his head and walked out, mumbling, Everyone says that Her Royal Highness is the reincarnation of Hua Mulan. Women are not inferior to men. Who is Hua Mulan? How can she be compared to Her Royal Highness? Her Royal Highness? County Magistrate Lu's expression changed, and he immediately said, Come back. Sir, is there anything else? Detective Zhao quickly turned his head. County Magistrate Lu looked at him and asked, Is it just Hua Mulan? Is there anything else? Detective Zhao asked doubtfully, Sir, what do you mean? County Magistrate Lu looked at him and asked, Is there anything about eloping, drowning in the river, adultery, freedom of marriage, or anything like that? Detective Zhao thought about it and said, I don't think so. That Hua Mulan is a heroine. She's loyal and filial. She's brave and smart. The people are saying that Her Royal Highness is... There's no elopement. Why are you reporting that she drowned in the river? County Magistrate Lu pointed at his nose and said, Do you have nothing to do all day? Hua Mulan is a national hero. She's not inferior to men.
Why do you care about her singing and praising her? Do you think that I'm not busy enough? Detective Zhao stood rooted to the ground. His breathing was rapid, and his chest was heaving up and down. After a long time, he gradually calmed down. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, "Sir, I have something to say." "I don't know if I should say it." "Say it." County Magistrate Lu was affected by what had just happened. His tone was slightly gentler. I forgot." Detective Zhao sighed. In the end, he didn't have the courage to say those 3 words to Lord Lu. He said, "I'll take my leave." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand at him and stroked the short beard on his chin. Hua Mulan, Princess Royal. Could this be the doing of the Princess Royal or Her Majesty? The Princess Royal's Women's Union had the support of Her Majesty and Her Majesty the Queen. This move was probably to further establish the Princess Royal's prestige in the hearts of the people. If he messed it up, that was close. County Magistrate Lu patted his chest and was secretly shocked. Recently, the Tsundra Loli had been pestering Rui for some reason. She stopped swinging on the swing and stopped playing on the slide. Instead, she circled around Rui all day. Her behavior was extremely abnormal. It was not easy to get rid of her. Only then did he have time to spend alone with Rui. Before he could walk over and talk to her, Mississippi Lu stood at the door and coughed softly. She looked at Li Yi and said, "Can you go out for a while? I have something to say to my sister." One Tsundra Loli had just left, and now another one was here to cause trouble. Li Yi glanced at her and said with some dissatisfaction, "What is it that you can't say directly?" Leaning against the door, Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and stared at him. After a while, Li Yi and Tsundra Loli squatted in the yard. There was a simple chessboard drawn on the ground. "Let's make it clear in advance. This time, your elephant can't fly, and the mouse can't drill into the ground." Tsundra Loli looked at him and said warily. A disdainful expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Was it necessary for him to use Dumbo and the gopher to play chess with an 11-year-old girl? Through the messages between the brothels, the news of the upcoming hero assembly should have almost spread throughout the martial arts world. However, there is only 1 month before the assembly begins. It's still a little tense. Some people might not be able to make it in time. Mississippi Lu sat by the bed and said to Rui while looking at her. Rui thought for a while and said, "Then let's postpone it for another half a month. We have to wait until most people arrive." Mississippi Lu said hesitantly, "In this way, there will be a lot more expenses. If the expenses are not enough, we can withdraw money from home." Rui thought for a while and said, "The qualification for the leader of the martial arts world is limited to the heaven list. It should be able to save a lot of time and expenses." "Okay," Mississippi Lu answered straightforwardly. There were countless masters in the martial arts world. No one would have thought that the hero assembly that swept through the martial arts world like a storm these days, the biggest event in the martial arts world in the past few decades, was decided in this way. The qualification for the leader of the martial arts world is limited to the heaven list. It was this short sentence that caused the fight for the heaven list to reach its climax in the near future. The reason why this decision was made was that it could save time and expenses. "Sister, are you really not planning to?" Mississippi Lu raised her head. She only managed to finish her sentence when Rui shook her head and said, "You know, I can't do these things." Mississippi Lu did not speak again. The decisions regarding the hero assembly had always been made by her sister. No matter how one looked at it, she was the most suitable person to be the leader. However, she did not have any thoughts about this position that countless people were fighting for. She looked outside the door and shook her head. The two of them were becoming more and more alike. "I won." The proud Loli stood up with a proud face. "If you don't act shamelessly, you won't be able to win against me." Li Yi frowned and thought for a while. He raised his head and looked at her. He asked, "Have you heard of Tigger? The kind that can jump out of the enemy's encirclement with its tail?" Chapter 528. Have you heard of Tigger? The proud girl paused and asked Yongning, who was standing beside Li Yi. "Yes." Yongning nodded. "Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, Air. I've heard of them." "I'm done. You two teamed up to trick me." The proud girl walked angrily into the room. "Royal sister, I didn't. I've really heard of them. If you don't believe me, I'll draw them for you." Yongning glanced at Li Yi and followed. It was very pitiful for her royal sister to not even know about Pretty Goat. Now, she had not even heard of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. To her, this was unimaginable. Li Yi shook his head. She was done playing so soon. He still had a howling celestial dog that could eat an elephant that he had not sent out. Jingdo was under the feet of the emperor. Any strange movement was under the court's watch and would never cause too much trouble. The chaos in Jingdo caused by the eldest princess's incident did not last for long. Under the heavy pressure of the court, it gradually calmed in the following days. In the Jingdo brothels, peacock flies to the southeast was no longer heard of. On the market, it was also difficult to buy Romance of the Western Chamber and The Peony Pavilion, which had already been listed as banned. However, in a woman's boudoir that was difficult for outsiders to enter, there were a few thin books under her pillow and mattress. She would only read them in the quiet of the night. Sometimes her face would flush, and sometimes she would cry. There were also ghost-like figures wandering around the streets and alleys. Their eyes darted everywhere, fearfully avoiding the officials. If they saw a young woman poking her head out on the street, they would carefully approach, pull open a slit in their clothes, and say in a low voice, "Girl, do you want the excellent edition of Romance of the Western Chamber, The Peony Pavilion? 10 copper coins a copy. Honest with all ages." The Women's Union, which had made a lot of noise, did not make any big moves after His Majesty lifted the eldest princess's confinement. They only made a lot of efforts to help the court carry out the new policy of women's marriage. Not only did they get a lot of praise in the court, but their influence among women was also growing day by day. The imperial court still did not give up on the investigation of John Doe. This kind of person who had ulterior motives and incited public opinion was really hateful. If they did not control him, he would probably cause more trouble in the future. Of course, none of this had anything to do with Li Yi. These days, he was quite idle. Her Highness the eldest princess was busy with other things. Naturally, the frequency of the Tsundra Lolita leaving the palace could not be too frequent. Although this caused his super invincible celestial dog to not have a place to use it, every few days, he would go shopping with Ru Yi, listen to plays, and play with Yongning and Xiaofan. His days were rather leisurely. In the blink of an eye, it had been more than a month since Yongning left the palace. "Whose child is that?" Zheng Zumo asked Li Yi, looking at the little girl playing with Xiao Cui and Yu Zhu. "A relative." Li Yi could only answer this way. Even the old mistress almost couldn't control herself when she found out about Yongning's identity for the first time. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. Moreover, for her, she preferred the life of an ordinary person at the moment. These days, he would occasionally bring Yongning here. After all, the brothel was getting bigger and bigger. In addition to the capital, it had spread to countless states and counties. The speed of its expansion was astonishing. As the mastermind behind the scenes, as the shopkeeper, as the behind-the-scenes shopkeeper, he naturally couldn't ignore everything. In fact, the interior of the brothel had been divided into various departments. Old Sun was only responsible for singing, acting, and the like. Wan Ruoqing mainly focused on the business under the brothel. Zheng Zumo, as the chief designer and general manager of the new lingerie, decided what the women who walked in front of the trend wore and how they wore it. In the details, Li Yi could no longer tell them what to do. As long as he could ensure that there were no mistakes in the general direction, he could let them do whatever they wanted. Of course, today's brothel naturally had more than what was on the surface. The complicated intelligence organization, the Lu Second Young Ladies Lu Alliance, and the Chivalry Ranking Board, which had a strong appeal, were all part of this huge organization. By then, that small shack had become so big that no one could ignore it. Yongning walked over from afar and fed a piece of osmanthus cake to Li Yi. She said, "Brother, this osmanthus cake is so delicious. When we go back, let's bring some for Sister Rui, Sister Xiao Huan, and Sister Duanwu." The old man standing behind her was already used to this. He wasn't surprised at how the princess called Li Yi. "Little sister, what's your name?" Zheng Zumo squatted down and picked Yongning up. She tapped on her nose and asked, "My name is Li Sini." Yongning wasn't shy at all. She was no longer the silly princess who only stared at the sky. She looked back at Li Yi and said, "Brother, I've seen this sister on TV before." Court examination? Zheng Zumo was confused. Li Yi didn't explain to Zheng Zumo.
Yongning was a child after all. Although he had warned her many times to be careful with what she said in the future and not to tell others what she knew before, a 5-year-old girl would sometimes say whatever came to her mind. Even at home, there would often be such awkward scenes. Rui and Xiaofan were already used to this. TV means. Anyway, they are praising you for being beautiful. Li Yi thought for a long time but couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation. He looked at her and said, "Children speak without fear. Don't take it to heart." Children's ability to distinguish was not very good. Perhaps they thought she was a character in a costume drama on TV. Actually, after hearing what she said, Li Yi also felt that she was somewhat similar to a famous actress in costume dramas. Children speak without fear? Zhang Zumo was dazed for a moment before she understood what he meant. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yi coldly. "Let's go. I'll take you out to play." Zhang Zumo glared at him and walked out with Yongning in her arms. The gray-robed elder flashed and was about to make a move when Li Yi tugged at his clothes and said, "It's fine." Outside, Zhang Zumo was already playing on the swing with Yongning. Li Yi held his chin with one hand. He still didn't see the underwear show he wanted to see, but he saw many pictures of the latest styles. Miss Zhang was Miss Zhang after all. She bought all the underwear of the women in the brothels in the capital. Although it was far from replacing the underwear, she had actually started the underwear business at the same time. The underwear shop had now become famous in the capital. Until now, although the women in the brothel were the most buying, there were already some bold women who had begun to test the market, especially in the shop with slogans such as, "It's good to be a woman." Slogans such as, "Even the birds and geese sink, and the moon and flowers blush in shame, all because I'm standing up for you," and "What's holding up isn't yourself, it's his heart" were sent out and circulated among the women. When he took out these advertising slogans, because he looked at Miss Zhang a few more times, she threw a few pillows at him. Of course, even if this kind of underwear was still a bit conservative, very few women would wear it. The pleasure of the couple in the bedroom was one thing, but most of them would secretly try it on at home. After all, no one wanted to lose some of the characteristics of a woman after a few years. No matter what, this was for the sake of women. Li Yi drank a cup of tea to moisten his throat. Just as he was thinking about whether to use the Princess Royal's power to help with the publicity, he heard singing coming from outside. Zhang Zumo had been trained as a pillar since she was a child. She was proficient in the 4 arts, and naturally, her singing was also good. Li Yi had heard her sing a few times. Her foundation was very good. However, which prostitute could sing, "Don't look at me just a sheep? Don't look at me just a sheep, the green grass becomes more fragrant because of me, the sky becomes bluer because of me, the white clouds become softer because of me." The voice was crisp and beautiful, extremely pleasant to the ear. Li Yi didn't have time to swallow a mouthful of tea and sprayed it all out. Chapter 529. She's an 18 or 19-year-old girl. Isn't it childish for her to sing such a song? Li Yi shook his head. When he walked into the yard, he heard Zhang Zumo's maids, Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu, whispering, "What happened to that Chen from last time?" Xiao Zhu glanced in the direction of the swing. Seeing that Zhang Zumo wasn't paying attention, she asked quietly. Xiao Cui pouted and said, "What else?" "He came several times, but Miss didn't see him. I heard that Chen's family is quite well off. His family is an official." "So what if he's an official? We even know someone with a title." Xiao Cui didn't care at all and said, "That Chen isn't good-looking. Miss doesn't want to be his concubine. Being an official isn't good. Miss will be wronged if she goes there. If the young Miss went over, she would naturally have to follow." That young Master Chen was actually quite good-looking. He was a fair-skinned young man, but compared to young Master Li, he was still inferior. Even if it wasn't for the young mistress, for her own sake, she would definitely choose someone she liked more. However, Miss and Li didn't seem to have that intention. This wouldn't do. How about waiting until the next time Miss took a bath or changed clothes, and then let Li in? This could be considered. It would be best if the rice could be cooked. Li Yi walked over and asked curiously, "What Chen?" Xiao Cui looked back at Li Yi and said, "He's an admirer of Miss and wants to take Miss as a concubine. He's been here many times." After saying that, he stared at the expression on Li Yi's face. "Concubine?
Li Yi's expression changed. This wouldn't do.
If Goddess Luo Shui ran away with someone else, where would he find such a good chief designer, chief artist, chief brothel manager?
Wouldn't everything be a mess?
Seeing the expression on his face, Xiao Chui finally relaxed.
What are you talking about?
Zheng Zumo walked over with Yongning in her arms.
I'm talking about Chen, Xiaozhu said immediately.
Zheng Zumo panicked for some reason.
She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. Why are you talking about him?
He has nothing to do with us.
Exactly.
Li Yi nodded and said in complete agreement, a woman is 18 years old. Even the imperial court has said that it is most appropriate for a woman to talk about marriage after the age of 20. By the way, what is the background of that Chen? Xiao Chui thought for a moment and said, in Chen's home, it seems like there is some kind of minister counselor?
What kind of wolf is a squire wolf? Does it bite people?
Xiao Zhu asked suspiciously.
Minister counselor?
Li Yi shook his head and said, how can a mere minister counselor be worthy of your miss? The son of the minister counselor is even more unworthy. The next time he comes, tell him to wait until he dismisses the minister of rights and takes the seat himself before we discuss this matter.
Xiao Chui nodded vigorously.
Zheng Zumo looked at him. Although his words were pleasant to hear, why did she still have the urge to slap him? Zheng Zumo glared at him and said, bah! The Minister of Rights is already a third-rank official.
How can you say something like this?
Li Yi sighed and said, self-improvement is the most important thing for a woman. If you look down on yourself, who will look up to you?
So what if he's the Minister of Rights? So what if he's a third-rank official?
You are the famous Luo Shui goddess of the Jing kingdom. Just say the word, and the line of suitors will stretch from here to outside the city. How can you not have this little bit of confidence? Zheng Zumo, Li Yi waved his hand and said, don't worry, after today, I will arrange for a few more people to guard this place. If that Chen guy dares to disturb again, break his legs.
I haven't thought about marrying yet.
Zheng Zumo glanced at him and said.
Li Yi nodded and said, that's right.
As citizens of the Jing kingdom, we must respond to the call of the country. Don't be in a hurry to marry. They came in a particularly relaxed mood, but they were a bit annoyed when they left. This bastard surnamed Chen, why did he come to make trouble at this critical time? Miss Zheng was only 18, 2 years away from turning 20. She couldn't even get a marriage certificate, let alone ask for a marriage. Besides, the Ministry of Rights was surnamed Chen. Wasn't this clearly related to Duke Chen's mansion? The Ministry of Rights was basically the territory of the Chen family, so this minister counselor should be the same. He was probably a branch or relative of the Chen family, related to Duke Chen's mansion. There weren't many good people among them.
Could he push Miss Zheng into the fire pit?
Obviously not. He was willing to go through fire and water for a friend, even if he had to offend the Chen family for this. Although it seemed that he had already offended the Chen family a long time ago.
Li Yi sighed.
If Miss Zheng wanted to leave, he would really be reluctant. Although the two of them hadn't gotten along since the first time they met, they had gone through so many things together, not just because of her importance in the brothel and other places.
He was just joking just now.
With her character, if she really wanted to do something, probably no one could stop her. Ever since she resolutely left the Jadeite courtyard when she was the most popular, even though she became famous because of the goddess of Luo River and her value skyrocketed 100 times or even 1,000 times, she still didn't regret her decision. She lived a hard life with Xiao Chui. From this, it could be seen what kind of opinions she had. Of course, if she really chose to leave, Li Yi wouldn't stop her. Of course, he still had to stop her. He had to persuade her with love, reason, and profit. No matter what, he had to make her stay. No matter how selfish he was, he couldn't let her stay in the brothel for the rest of her life. That day would come eventually. Li Yi had a headache. Was there a way to completely solve this problem? Brother, I like that Sister Zheng just now. On the road, Yongning suddenly turned her head and said while holding his hand. Li Yi squatted down and picked her up, letting her sit on his shoulder, and said, why does Cindy like her?
She sings for Cindy,
Yongning said while swinging her legs. Li Yi shook his head. Yongning's affection for Zheng Zumo wasn't because she was willing to sing that kind of childish song for her. In her subconscious mind, She probably also regarded Zhang Zibo as someone familiar in her previous life. Even if she had only seen Zhang Zibo on TV, it was already precious to her. "Brother, do you like Sister Zhang?" Yongning grabbed Li Yi's neck and asked. "Do you like her?" "I like her." Li Yi sighed and said helplessly, his neck was about to break. "Yeah, I knew it." The little girl was obviously happy. "Brother, I want to hear you sing." She became more talkative when she was alone with Li Yi. "Sure, what song do you want to listen to?" "Two Tigers." "Can you change to another song?" "Change what?" "How about Don't Look at Me, I'm Just a Sheep?" "I've heard it just now." Okay. Li Yi could only shake his head helplessly again. A moment later, a voice came. Two tigers, running fast, one without ears, one without tail, how strange. How strange. A few steps behind him, several palace guards tightly pursed their lips, but they didn't dare to laugh. Their bodies were slightly trembling, and their faces were already a little blue. Even the faces of the two gray-robed old men twitched when they raised their heads to look ahead. Hearing a strange movement behind him, Li Yi turned around and saw their expressions. He said coldly, "If anyone dares to laugh today, I'll push the merry-go-round for the whole day tomorrow." This was a life-threatening task. When the guards heard this, their expressions immediately turned serious and no longer showed the slightest hint of surprise. Li Yi turned around with satisfaction and continued to sing, "Two tigers. Puff. Haha. I really can't help it." All the guards clutched their stomachs and staggered. Li Yi's expression was calm, and he didn't look back. Fang had been working hard these days, and it was time to take a few days off to relax. Chapter 530. Don't underestimate me just because I'm a sheep. The intelligence of a sheep is unimaginable. Xiaofan hummed the song she had just learned to prepare for tomorrow's Mid-Autumn Festival. Ever since she could remember, she had always spent the Mid-Autumn Festival in the stockade village. First, she spent it with the master and the young mistress. Then, it was only the young mistress and the young mistress. Then she had the young master. From then on, the Mid-Autumn Festival was different from before. Everything was good in the capital city, except that the moon was not as round as in Qing and Prefecture. She still remembered that the young master told them the story of Chang'e flying to the moon last Mid-Autumn Festival. Of course, there were even more incredible things about the moon. However, it was fine that the moon was not round, but the key was that the son-in-law seemed to be very happy. In Xiao Huan's memory, the son-in-law was not that happy during the Mid-Autumn Festival or the 15th of every month. So every few days, she would feel a little worried. She did not know why there was such a change now, but change was always good. Ever since that little princess came to the house, the son-in-law had changed a little. Sometimes, she would have a sour feeling in her heart. Later on, she thought that she would soon return to the palace and live alone in a very big room. It must be very lonely. She did not know if she would be afraid to sleep at night. In any case, when she was that young, she did not dare to sleep alone. Thinking of this, she felt some sympathy in her heart, and the trace of jealousy in her heart also dissipated. Li Yi walked out of the room. He had just coaxed Yongning to sleep. Tomorrow was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Although he wanted to keep her, the old emperor would definitely not allow it. It had only been less than a month and a half, and the old emperor had called her back to the palace for 3 days. Rounding it up, it was 10 days. He had to postpone it for 10 days next month. Otherwise, he would suffer a great loss. Speaking of which, since coming to the capital, there had been a lot of messy things. It was only recently that he had completely relaxed. He really hoped that the days would continue like this. What King of Shu, what Chen family, what young Duke Qin, what Dianxia Academy. He didn't have to care about those messy things anymore. Yongning had just fallen asleep, Xiao Huan was busy in the kitchen, and Mississippi Lu rarely stayed out of the house. She was wiping her precious Choshue in the yard. In the room beside her, the proud Lolita looked excited. She was talking with Rui. What a harmonious and warm scene. Sister Rui, can you let me marry sir in the future? As soon as Li Yi stepped into the room, he heard that Sundra Lolita pulling Rui's hand and saying this. The warm and harmonious scene was instantly shattered. Rui was stunned for a moment, then she chuckled. She really couldn't answer this little girl's joke. Aya, I'm not joking. The Tsundere Lolita was a little anxious and said, even if I really marry Sir in the future, Sister Rui is still a sister. I will be very obedient, just like now. I will always be younger than Sister Rui. Seeing that Rui was still unmoved, the Tsundere Lolita gritted her teeth and said, two younger is fine too. At most, 1 younger than Sister Zhang that Sir secretly went to see. No younger than that. Sister Zhang? Rui let out a soft cry of surprise. She looked over the Tsundere Lolita. Sister Zhang. Mississippi Lu's Choshui had already been wiped. She crossed her arms and carried her long sword in front of her chest. She stared straight at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in front of him and then looked behind him. He had a feeling that the world was big and there was nowhere to escape. Husband, if you really like that goddess Luo Shui, then please bring her back. When there were only the two of them in the room, Rui looked at Li Yi and said, Husband, you don't need to worry about me. I'm not a jealous woman. Among the noble officials in the capital, which one of them is like you? I'm afraid that after a long time, there will be gossip. Li Yi raised his eyebrows. Who would dare to gossip? Moreover, I've been married to you for so long, but I haven't had a child for you or for the Li family. Rui's expression was a little gloomy, but her expression was very serious. That Miss Zhang can be considered talented and beautiful. She also has a good relationship with you. If she can enter the residence, I will feel better. Wife, don't joke. Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, what do you mean by there will be a child? This kind of thing can't be rushed. Since the last time, she couldn't figure out Rui's routine. She and Rui were biological sisters. Perhaps their personalities were similar? According to Rui's personality, if he nodded slightly, the autumn water would be intimately touching his neck. He looked at Rui again and looked around. He asked suspiciously, tell me, where is the sword hidden? After a while, Li Yi came out of the room. Looking at the tightly shut door, he gritted his teeth and said, Li Bingning, come out. Inside the room, Ru Yi's hand subconsciously caressed her abdomen and she sighed softly. After you leave the palace this time, don't cause any more trouble. Spend more time with those officials. For the rest of the time, stay in the residence. Don't interact with those shady people. In a luxurious carriage at the gate of the palace, a woman dressed in palace attire said to a young man, Xian, understands. The young man's face was slightly pale. He lowered his head and said yes. He got out of the carriage and got into another carriage. Back to the King of Shu's mansion. He said in a low voice. The carriage slowly started and gradually disappeared into the street. The capital is still the same. The King of Shu murmured as the carriage moved forward with difficulty on the crowded street. He held a thick book in one hand and lifted the curtain with the other. At the same time, in the Qin mansion, another young man slowly walked out of the room while holding his chest. He took a few deep breaths of air and a strange smile appeared on his face. The taste of freedom, it's been a long time. Greetings, little Duke. A timid voice sounded out from the side. Qin Yu turned to look at the unfamiliar maidservant, an expression of interest on his face. However, when he saw the long scar on the side of her face, he frowned and asked, Why haven't I seen you before? I only entered the mansion half a month ago. The servant girl said carefully. Qin Yu didn't ask any more and just waved his hand in annoyance. I'll take my leave. The servant girl breathed a sigh of relief and left in a hurry. Although she had just entered the mansion, she had heard many rumors about the little Duke. There were many servant girls in the mansion who had been violated by him. Naturally, she was afraid of him. Xiaomei, why are you in such a hurry? A rough voice of a man came from the side. The servant girl called Xiaomei stopped in her tracks and said, Brother Wu, it's nothing. Yes, this is the backyard. Walk slowly and don't bump into anyone. The man nodded and said, Brother Wu, I understand. The servant girl nodded. Brother Wu was a favorite of Fifth Lord and was a very good person. When a few servants bullied her last time, he had stood up for her and had always taken good care of her. All right, you can go. I still have something to do. The man waved his hand, turned around and left. The servant girl named Xiaomei stood there in a daze for a while. She sighed, and a complicated expression appeared on her face. Only when a voice calling for her came from the front did she respond and quickly run over. Chapter 531. Before the Mid-Autumn Festival, Yongning and the Tsundra Lolita were taken into the palace. Today was the second day after the Mid-Autumn Festival, and Yongning should be sent back in 2 days. Since the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cooler. The unbearable summer heat has gradually faded away. In the capital, the smoothie shops and ice-making workshops have gradually closed, but the sales of Rui's dew are as hot as ever. According to the experience of last year, this kind of popularity will continue for at least 3 months, and will gradually decline after the first snow falls. Li Yi was lying on the rocking chair in the courtyard with his eyes closed. Xiaofan stood behind him, and a pair of skillful hands pressed on his head skillfully. Knowing that her son-in-law was thinking about something, this time, she didn't chatter in Li Yi's ear, which was rare. Li Yi was indeed thinking about something, and it was a very troublesome thing. Rui's mood has been a little depressed in recent days. He thought it was a normal reaction during a special period, and tried all kinds of methods but failed to change it. It was not until 2 days ago that he found the crux of the matter. It has been a few months since the two of them consummated their marriage. Under normal circumstances, there should be no movement in her stomach. This is what she cares about. This is also what Li Yi is worried about. Could it be that in the process of transmigration, some unknown changes occurred in some places, leading to the current situation? He even went to the Imperial Physicians Bureau to find Lu Jimin. Although old Lu's diagnosis was that there was no problem, it did not make him feel at ease. After all, if there was really something wrong because of the different body and soul, it was not something that could be seen just by feeling the pulse. Of course, the problem may also lie with Rui. After all, this matter seems to have nothing to do with the level of martial arts. But considering the pressure in her heart, Li Yi did not say anything or do anything, and tried to avoid this topic these 2 days. Since ancient times, people would blame this kind of thing on women. Even they themselves thought so. No wonder Rui wanted him to marry Miss Zheng. This has probably become a knot in her heart that can't be untied. Forget it, stop rubbing. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. Li Yi patted Xiao Huan's hand and said, "Oh." The young maidservant behind her responded in a low voice. She had a worried expression on her face. The son-in-law had encountered some trouble, and the young miss didn't seem to be very happy either. How good would it be if she could help the son-in-law? The sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Xiao Huan raised her head and saw the princess who often came to the house walking in. She could see princesses every day, and more than one of them. She was already immune to princesses. "Xiao Huan, brew a cup of tea." Li Yi casually stretched out his hand as a greeting and said, "Sit anywhere." The maidservant looked around. There wasn't even a chair here. Did the son-in-law want the princess to sit on the floor? "Guild leader, you shouldn't be so free lately, right?" Li Yi asked lazily as he looked at the princess. Emingzu didn't sit down. She looked at him and said, "The specific things are naturally done by the subordinates. I'm not that busy." Li Yi sat up from the chair and looked at her. How could she not be busy? The women's union didn't bring all the women together to hold a party every day to discuss which perfume smelled better or which brassiere was more stylish. They clearly could do more things. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "When the women of the noble families in the capital unite, they can indeed do some practical things for more women. How did you think of it?" Li Yi stood up from the chair and said, "What do you mean, how did I think of it? The women's union is the crystallization of the wisdom of the women in the capital. What does it have to do with me?" The princess nodded and said, "I always feel that the women's union can do more than help the court implement the law of delaying the age of marriage for women. What do you think?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I don't understand the matters of you women. Say a few words." Emingzu looked at him and said, "Delaying the age of marriage for women and standardizing the midwifery procedures were all proposed by you." "I really don't understand." "Say it." Li Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Then I'll simply say a few words." "I'm all ears," the princess said as she sat in the chair that Li Yi had just sat in. This women's union, of course, has more than just that. Women are of low status and are often bullied. In this case, even the government sometimes doesn't give them justice according to the law. Your women's union can act as an umbrella for these women. While standardizing the law, you can also return a clear sky to the capital. After the implementation of the new marriage law, it will make the lives of many poor families in the capital more difficult. You can provide these women who have reached the age of 13 with jobs that they can do. For example, embroidery, printing and dyeing, perfume workshop, soap workshop. These jobs are actually suitable for women so that they can support themselves and even the whole family. Open up a female school, pick out some talented women, and focus on training them. For example, female doctors, female accountants, female shopkeepers, female spies, female assassins, and so on. Our business will grow bigger and bigger in the future, so we can't do without these. Female spies, female assassins? Mingzhu looked at him in surprise. What does this have to do with business? This is not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, embroidery, printing, and weaving are more important. Let Li Xian improve the loom, and also improve the recipe of dyes. Don't make cloth, make clothes. Forget it. You don't need to worry about this. I'll arrange it. Women's school, you have to pay enough attention to it. Don't teach women's commandments, don't read women's biography, learn management, learn technology. 2 hours later, Li Yi drank the tea that Xiaofan brought over in one gulp and said, I'll just say a few words. Do you remember? Mingzhu nodded, then shook her head and said, to do so many things, I'm afraid it will cost a lot of money. The national treasury is already tight. They won't use the extra money on these things. The imperial court? Li Yi curled his lips. If the imperial court wanted to interfere, he wouldn't agree to it. Li Yi looked at the princess and asked, are you short of money? Is Li Xian short of money? I'm short of money. I'm short of money. Mingzhu thought for a while, then shook her head and said, not short of money. Li Yi asked again, since we are not short of money, why do we need to ask the imperial court? Does this matter have anything to do with the imperial court? Mingzhu thought for a while, but still didn't understand what he meant. Why don't you say a few more words? Li Yi sighed and said, then I'll say a few more words. 2 hours later, the princess stood up and looked at Li Yi and said, I understand. Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and patted her shoulder. With an extremely serious expression he said, good luck, I believe in you. Chapter 532. Something is not quite right. Before the princess left, she suddenly turned around and looked at Li Yi with bright eyes. Just now he had said a few more words. Li Yi was very thirsty. He held a pot of tea and gulped it down. Hearing this, he put down the teapot and asked, what is wrong? The princess showed a thoughtful expression and said, you usually avoid trouble when you can, and you don't say a word more if you can. Why are you so attentive this time? There must be something wrong. Looking at Mingzhu's slightly suspicious eyes, Li Yi wanted to throw the teapot in his hand at her. F***CK. I just said a few more words. What's wrong? Do you think I have any ulterior motives? If you were the first prince instead of the eldest princess, I wouldn't have to do these things and say these words. I have nothing better to do. At the risk of being checked by the court, I helped to implement the new marriage law, and I stayed up late to write the script. I even had a few pimples on my face. I also had to hire the internet water army to fan the flames and create public opinion. It was not easy for me to do all this. It was good to sell perfume and underwear. Why would I care about the happiness of the women in the world? Whether their thoughts were independent or not, and whether their consciousness of struggle was awakened. What a heartless fellow. Why didn't she take a look at who was the one getting the benefits? All she did was casually show her blade in the imperial court and earned her reputation and money. When the two ideas he had just said became reality, who knew what she would get? Now, she was actually suspecting that he had ulterior motives? Without him, she would still be grounded. Xiaofan, see the guest out. Li Yi lay back on the chair and was extremely disappointed. He didn't look at her again and ordered the little maid. The little maid looked ahead blankly. That was the princess. How could he see her out? Mingzhu wants to open a girls' school? Emperor Jing turned his head and looked. He shook his head and said, according to what the empress said, the scale of this girls' school is really rare in the world. It can be called another directorate. The national treasury has always been tight, but there is no extra money for her to toss about. Although women's schools were rare among the common people, They were indispensable to those scholarly families and aristocratic families. The girls in the family had to enter the women's school at an early age. Aside from learning the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, as well as poetry and classics, they also had to learn the women's reflections and women's training, which were related to women's virtues, women's duties, and the etiquette of the boudoir. He was not surprised that Mingzhu wanted to do something for women these days and wanted to open a girls' school. However, if they followed her plan, it would cost a lot of money. The national treasury was already tight, so it was impossible to use the money on these things. The Empress put a bowl of soup on the table in front of Emperor Jing and said, "Your Majesty guessed wrong this time. Mingzhu did not want to take money from the national treasury." Emperor Jing asked doubtfully, "Without an investment of 100,000 taels of silver, I'm afraid it will be difficult to succeed. Where will she get the money?" The Empress smiled and said, "Your Majesty, do you know what is the most profitable business in Jingdo?" Jing Emperor drank a mouthful of soup and turned to look at her. He had to deal with countless government affairs every day. How could he have the energy to care about these things? "It's perfume." The Empress looked at him and said, "In the palace, from the concubines to the palace maids, even the little princesses use perfume. It is very popular outside the palace. Every time a new product is released, it will set off a wave in the circle of the noble ladies in the city. Your Majesty, do you know how much this inch-tall bottle of perfume sells for?" Emperor Jing shook his head. Li Yi said that he could not smell perfume, so the palace maids around him were not allowed to use it. The Empress never used it, so he was not very clear about this. 10 taels of silver. The Empress shook her head and looked at him. 1 bottle is 10 taels of silver. Even so, there are still countless people scrambling for it. What's more, perfume is only one of the industries under Mingzhu's name. The profits of soap and liquor are not inferior to perfume. To be honest, I do not know how much wealth Mingzhu has now. Emperor Jing was surprised and said, "These things have such a big profit. In just half a year, she can easily take out 100,000 taels of silver?" 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. It should be known that the annual tax revenue of the Jing Kingdom was only 10 million strings of silver. In the past 2 years, there had been disasters. Last year's tax revenue was only 8 million strings of silver. It was incredible that Mingzhu alone had a wealth of 100,000 or more in such a short period of time. "This is all thanks to your Majesty's County Earl Li." The Empress smiled and said, "Not only Mingzhu, but Xian has also earned a lot of money in the past 6 months. I have received their filial piety these days. My hands are tired." He did not want to be a good county earl, but learned to do those profit-seeking things like a businessman. Emperor Jing shook his head and asked, "What has Li Yi been doing these days?" Changda's figure appeared behind him and said, "Your Majesty, County Earl Li has been playing around with the 2 princesses these days." "What else?" Seeing that Changda did not speak again after saying one sentence, Emperor Jing looked back and asked after a while, "Your Majesty, nothing else?" Changda shook his head and said. Emperor Jing was stunned and asked, "He only plays with Yongning Shaning every day?" Changda nodded and said, "County Earl Li said that this is to let Princess Yongning relax and help her illness." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said helplessly, "I don't know where he learned his medical skills. Although it seems absurd, it is effective." "Forget it," Changda thought for a while and said, "County Earl Li also said that because His Majesty summoned Princess Yongning to the palace twice and interrupted the treatment, she needs another 10 days of treatment." "Treatment?" Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" "It means that because His Majesty summoned the princess to the palace for 3 days, the princess needs to stay in County Earl Li's mansion for another 10 days. Changda said. "Nonsense." Emperor Jing slammed the table and said, "A monarch does not joke. I said 2 months, so it is 2 months. Not a day more, not a day less. You actually blame me for summoning Yongning into the palace? Why, can't I see my own daughter?" Changda sighed and said, "County Earl Li said that the last 10 days are very important. If something goes wrong, I am afraid that all the previous efforts will be wasted. Her Royal Highness may become like before." Hearing this, Emperor Jing's body shook slightly. How could he forget that stupid expression and empty eyes? After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, 10 days, forget it. 10 days is 10 days. Thinking of another thing, Emperor Jing suddenly asked,
Where did Xiaoning go? Why haven't I seen her these days?
Changde pondered for a moment and said, "Didn't His Majesty order that Princess Xiaoning can go out of the palace these days?"
Only then did Emperor Jing remember that Xiaoning had thrown a tantrum and threatened to go on a hunger strike. He had a headache before he agreed. In these 2 months, he could go out of the palace to see Yongning. Did she go every day? After a while, an angry voice came from the Hall of Diligent Government. Is it not enough to kidnap my daughter? Do you want to kidnap another one? Chapter 533. Yongning's condition is more urgent. Should we add a few more courses of treatment? Li Yi thought about it carefully and felt that the old emperor wouldn't agree. According to the information he got from Changde, it might be a big risk if he pushed it further. Forget it, it's better not to take this risk. After fooling around for 10 more days, there was still half a month left to squander. Yongning didn't realize at all that she would return to the palace in half a month. She ran in the yard, picked up the paper planes that had flown out, and let out a crisp laughter. Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu were very depressed, because the distance the two of them flew with their paper planes was not as far as Yongning, not to mention that she was still a little girl. This made the two big sisters suffer quite a blow. Li Yi glanced at them. It would be a miracle if they could fly past Yongning. He had found the method of folding paper airplanes from a book called Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had accidentally glanced at it and saw it as Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had wondered how such a book could be placed in the provincial library. Airplanes were also divided into high and low levels, and did it need to be taught? This is the account for the past half a month. Have a look. Zhang Zumo threw a thick account book in front of him. Yes, he was now at Zhang Zumo's place again. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted to marry Miss Zhang and have children. It was because Yongning insisted on pestering him to come over every time. In the past few days, he had heard Little Bunnies Be Good, Flying Bugs, and Where is Spring? To be honest, seeing Yongning and Miss Zhang being so close, he actually felt a kind of sour feeling in his heart. So what if she was beautiful and sang well? Li Yi tore 2 pieces of paper from the back of the account book and folded 2 paper planes. However, because the paper was too thin, they didn't fly very far. He was too lazy to do such a boring thing as looking at the account book. He reached out to grab a handful of melon seeds and asked casually, "Where is Ruoqing?" Seeing that half of the seeds in front of her were gone, Zhang Zumo silently moved the bag of seeds closer to her and said, "He went to the underwear store and will be back at night." Since yesterday, Yongning had said that she wanted to eat osmanthus cake several times. In fact, Li Yi also wanted to eat it.
With the same ingredients and the same method, the taste of the cake he made was far from the one made by Wan Ruoqing.
Li Yi always suspected that she had some ancestral secret that she didn't tell him. While looking at the latest lingerie illustration designed by Zhang Zumo, he was munching on melon seeds. Although the style was still a little conservative, it had a unique flavor. No wonder those men couldn't hold themselves back when they saw it. Li Yi looked at the album and then looked at Zhang Zumo. He imagined a certain scene and felt that he wouldn't be able to hold himself back if it were him. "Why are you looking at me?" Zhang Zumo subconsciously hid back. She always felt that Li Yi's eyes could see through her clothes and see the purple underwear she was wearing today. It was an indescribable strange feeling. "I won't lose a piece of flesh just by looking," Li Yi said and rubbed his nose. Fortunately, it wasn't bleeding, but he didn't dare to look again. Once you started eating melon seeds, you couldn't stop. Li Yi finished the one in his hand. When he reached out again, he found that Zhang Zumo was holding the bag in her hand and looking at him angrily. She looked at Li Yi and said, "That's all there is left." Li Yi curled his lips. "Tisk, it's just melon seeds, and it's even the original flavor. It's as rare as anything." If he told her that melon seeds had 5-spice, cream, jujube, and cucumber flavor, wouldn't this woman go crazy? If it was in the future, he wouldn't want such disgusting melon seeds even if they were given to him. "Look, what's that?" Li Yi inadvertently glanced behind Zhang Zumo and suddenly widened his eyes. He said with great surprise, "Guanyin Bodhisattva has appeared." "What?" Zhang Zumo hurriedly turned around. When she saw the empty sky without even a single cloud, she finally realized something. Li Yi held the embroidered bag in his hand and ignored Zhang Zumo's murderous eyes.
He pointed at a style of underwear and said, "This color can be a little more colorful, a little wilder." Zhang Zimo glared at Li Yi and stood up angrily. When she turned around and walked to Yongning, she immediately put on a smile and said, "Cinny, come here. Sister will help you fly." "Okay, okay," Yongning said happily. She looked at Li Yi and found that he had his back to her. She quietly ran to Zhang Zimo and whispered, "Sure, Sister Zhang, come here. I'll tell you a secret." "What secret does Cinny want to tell sister?" Zhang Zimo squatted down and asked with a smile. Yongning looked at Li Yi again and whispered, "Last time I asked brother if he liked Sister Zhang. Brother said he liked her." Zhang Zimo was startled. She could roughly guess what the scene was like at the time. However, she still had a little expectation in her heart. She asked, "How did Cinny ask?" "Cinny first." Seeing the little girl's serious answer, Zhang Zimo shook her head. It was not much different from what she had guessed. However, he was probably just coaxing the little girl. How could he like her? She pinched Yongning's little face and felt inexplicably disappointed. However, she still smiled and said, "Come, sister will help you fly. By the way, why is this called a paper plane?" "What is a plane?" Yongning didn't answer this question. She said mysteriously, "Also, brother said last time that he wanted to marry Sister Tsang as a concubine and bring Sister Tsang home." "What is a concubine? When will sister come home with us?" Zhang Zimo's body shook, and the smile on her face froze. The paper plane in her hand also fell to the ground. Li Yi looked at Zhang Zimo walking back to the room with her head down. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. "It can't be, just because I ate a small bag of melon seeds? Hey, what's wrong with you? I'll return the melon seeds to you." "It can't be, how about I buy a big bag for you?" Hey, why did you close the door?" Seeing her go in and close the door, Li Yi stood up in shock. He was a little confused. "It's just a few melon seeds. Qin Manor, in a certain exquisite courtyard." "Congratulations on your recovery, Brother Qin." "Congratulations, young Duke Qin. Young Duke Qin has just recovered from his injury, so it's not suitable for you to drink. This toast is for you." Young Duke Qin was an influential figure in the capital's foppish circle. Not only was his status respected, but his luck was also different from others. He was violently beaten by Crown Prince Li Xian, slapped in the face by Li Xianzi, and grounded by Prime Minister Qin for half a year. It was not easy for him to end his grounding early. But in less than 2 days, he was seriously injured by a righteous man who saw injustice because he molested a woman on the street. Several of his ribs were broken, and he had been recuperating at home until today. Such a bumpy experience made those who saw it sad and those who heard it cry. Everyone was watching with wide eyes to see what the next unfortunate thing that young Duke Qin would encounter would be. There were only 2 people who could sit at the same table as Qin Yu. Cui Qingyu took a sip of wine and asked, "That thief still hasn't been caught?" Chen Lijun shook his head and said, "That person acted decisively. Before the officers arrived, he had already left the city. Although he left his name behind, for people like that, once they escape, it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to catch them again." "It's fine." Qin Yu shrugged as if he didn't care much about this matter. He asked, "I heard that your highness also left the palace?" "Just 2 days ago." Cui Qingyu nodded and said, "With your highness's temper, why didn't you find trouble with that person?" Qin Yu raised his eyebrows and asked, "You mean Li Yi?" Cui Qingyu glanced at him. The hand of a servant girl who was pouring wine for him suddenly trembled and the wine spilled on the table. The servant girl with a long scar on her face turned pale and hurriedly wiped it with her sleeve. Cui Qingyu frowned and said, Okay, put it here, I'll do it myself." Besides that Li Xianzi who is deeply favored by the emperor. "Oh, I should call him Li Xianhua now." "Besides him, who else could it be?" Qin Yu's mouth pulled into a strange smile. Cui Qingyu shook his head and said, "With his current status, no matter what, your highness can't do anything to him. After your highness left the palace, your highness closed your door and didn't go out. I heard from the servants of the prince's mansion that your highness only read books every day and seems to have completely changed your temperament." Cui Chengyu's voice gradually became smaller. The servant girl with a scar on her face retreated to the back. She lowered her head and bit her lips. Her eyes were extremely complicated.
Chapter 534. Xiao Chui, come here. Yong Ning and Shaoning were playing house in the yard. Li Yi sat on the stone bench and waved at Xiao Chui. Li, what's the matter? Xiao Chui ran over. Is your young mistress on her period these days? Although he knew that it was inappropriate to ask this question, Zheng Zumo had ignored him for a long time because of those melon seeds. Miss Zheng wasn't that stingy, so Li Yi felt that the problem should be in other areas. Ah! When Xiao Chui heard this, she was stunned for a moment. Then, her face turned so red that it looked like blood was about to drip out. This kind of thing about a woman, how could she casually tell others? If she said something like this, the young mistress would beat her to death if she knew. No, in a few days. Thinking of this, Xiao Chui said with a red face. I see. Li Yi shook his head. If it wasn't for that reason, what else could it be? Xiao Chui lowered her head and muttered, I don't know what's wrong with the young mistress these days. She's always in a daze and often forgetful. The young mistress has never been like this before. In short, it's very strange. Inside the room, Zheng Zumo sat at the table with a brush in her hand. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, and the rice paper in front of her was blank. The knocking continued for a long time before she heard it. She put down the brush and said, The door isn't closed. Come in. Crash. Li Yi threw a big bag on the table, looked at her and said, Salt and pepper flavor, 5 spices flavor, cream flavor, red dates flavor, plum flavor. I just ate a few of your melon seeds. Is there a need to be so angry for so long? Zheng Zumo was stunned. She opened one of the small bags, and a strange fragrance wafted out. She tasted one, and the expression on her pretty face changed slightly. Then she put them all away and said to Li Yi, When was I angry? It was a woman's nature to refuse to admit it. She almost wrote the word angry on her face. How dare you say you're not angry? If you're not angry, then give me back my melon seeds. You mentioned a clothing store yesterday. What's going on? Zheng Zumo deliberately changed the topic. Li Yi shook his head and was finally able to speak normally. He said, The fame of underwear has already spread. We can expand our business and make ready-made clothes. In addition to the common styles, we can also design some new styles and divide the sizes. Whichever one the customer likes, they can wear it directly after paying the bill. In this era, there were no clothing stores. There were only cloth shops. Small families would buy cloth at home and cut it into their own clothes. Rich families would hire a tailor to make it, so there was no concept of ready-made clothes for the time being. Food, clothing, housing, and transportation. No matter what era it was, people couldn't live without these 4 things. If you were to engage in these 4 industries, you would never have to worry about being eliminated by the times. Although she would be involved in the ready-made clothing industry together with Her Royal Highness, she had always contributed money, manpower, and effort. She would just sit back and wait for her share of the profits. She would not ask about the management. Zheng Zumo said while eating melon seeds, After opening 2 new underwear stores, there is a lack of manpower. If we want to open a ready-made clothing store, we will need more women who are good at needlework. I'm afraid the brothel will not be able to find so many. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Don't worry about this. There will be no shortage of manpower soon. Near the capital, the new marriage law was enforced. In the following period of time, there would be many women between the ages of 13 and 16 staying at home doing nothing. This was also a headache for the court. If they could have something to do and solve the problem of employment for women of the right age, the court would definitely strongly support it. Then when Sister Ruoqing comes back, I will discuss it with her. Zheng Zumo said, then looked at Li Yi and said, I have something to ask you. What? Li Yi looked back at her. You. Zheng Zumo opened her mouth and thought about it. In the end, she didn't say anything. She waved her hand and said, Forget it, it's nothing. It was very impolite to not finish a sentence, especially for people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry to leave. He looked at her and asked, What is it? Nothing, you can go. Zheng Zumo waved her hand impatiently. Really? Really? Then let me grab a handful of melon seeds before I go. I want the creamy ones. The Wang family village was a small village less than 10 miles away from the capital.
Although the Wang family village was located outside the most prosperous capital of the Jing kingdom, it didn't have much of the capital's glory. The dozens of families in the village relied on the thin fields at the front of the village to eat. When the year was good, they could drink thin rice every meal. When the year was bad, the family had to tighten their belts and pray for God's blessing. Wang Lauer was an ordinary villager in the Wang family village. At this time, he was squatting on a rock in the yard, smoking a pipe and sighing. "Dad, it's time to eat." A little girl about 10 years old, wearing coarse clothes and an apron, came out of the dilapidated house. She walked in front of him and said timidly, "Eat, eat, eat. You only know how to eat all day. You won't be able to get married." Wang Lauer was angry when he saw his third daughter and waved his hand impatiently. Seeing this, the little girl's body trembled and hurriedly retreated back into the house. Wang Lauer put the pipe on the rock and coughed, and said angrily, "What is the court doing? Are they trying to kill me?" His wife was disappointing and gave him 3 daughters in a row. Although he still had a strong desire to have a son, he didn't dare to have another one. If he gave birth to a daughter, he wouldn't be able to continue living. Although they were daughters, they were also his children. Although they were often beaten and scolded, they had been living in poverty for more than 10 years, and they had grown up one by one. His eldest daughter was 14 years old and had just been engaged. The second daughter was 13 years old and was also at the age to get married. He thought that if his 2 daughters got married, there would be 2 mouths to feed at home, and he would have betrothal gifts from 2 families, so he could live a better life. However, he didn't expect that his eldest daughter would get married in a month. The court suddenly issued an order that women couldn't get married before they were 16 years old. This delayed the 2 children all of a sudden. Wang Lauer suddenly felt a lot of pressure and couldn't live anymore. King Court, they don't let people live. Wang Lauer scolded angrily. A middle-aged woman poked her head out of the house and said, "Keep your voice down. If someone hears you, you'll be punished." It would have been better if she hadn't said it. As soon as this matter was brought up, Wang Lauer became even angrier. He jumped down from the rock and scolded, "What's going on? They're allowed to have children, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. I just want to talk about it. This King Court, they even care about me marrying off my daughter. Wang Lauer, who are you calling King dog?" Following this voice, an official dressed in black walked in from outside. "This King Wang Ergu, he owes me 2 copper coins and hasn't paid me back in a month." Wang Lauer looked at the official with a fawning expression and asked, "Sir, what brings you here today?" The official waved his hand and flipped through a booklet in his hand. He went straight to the point and said, "Wang Lauer, your Zhaodi and Indi are both over 13 years old, right?" When Wang Lauer heard this, he was stunned for a moment. His expression immediately changed and he said warily, "Sir, my Zhaodi and Indi are both betrothed. I don't care if they are betrothed or not, as long as they are over 13 years old." "All right, your Liodi." Wang Lauer's face was full of fear. My Liodi is only 10 years old. She is still a child." The official glanced at her and directly asked, "It said that if any family has a girl who is over 13 years old and has good sewing skills, she can work in the workshop. She will work for 8 hours a day and will be paid 10 copper coins. Will your family's Zhaodi and Indi go?" No. Wang Lauer shook his head repeatedly. How could he believe the official's nonsense? 10 copper coins for 8 hours a day? He couldn't even earn that much even if he worked 16 hours a day. Was he trying to trick his own daughter? All right, then I'll remember it. The official waved his hand and turned to leave. Wang Lauer was stunned when he heard this. He left just like that and didn't want to force him? What if he scared him a little more and he agreed? Dad. A figure hurriedly ran in from outside. It was a 13 or 14-year-old girl who panted and said, "Dad, I heard that Her Royal Highness's workshop is recruiting people. For the first 3 months, it will be 10 copper coins a day. After 3 months, it will be 15 copper coins a day." "Is it true?" Wang Lauer asked with his eyes wide open. "It's true." The girl nodded repeatedly and said, "There is a notice outside. The official is going from door to register. I heard that the quota is limited this time. I saw the official just now. Dad, did you register me and Indi?" Wang Lauer was stunned again. After he came to his senses, he ran outside.
Sir, don't go.
I'm willing, I'm willing.
Chapter 535. Li Yi had always felt that 2 months was a long time, but in reality, it was just a blink of an eye. It was already mid-September in the second year of Jinghe. If it wasn't for the fact that the old emperor had delayed Yongning's return to the palace by 10 days, they would have left a few days ago. The reason why it was them and not her was because in the past 2 months, the Tsundra Lolita had used the excuse of visiting Yongning to visit them for 2 whole months. The official reason for these 2 months was to treat Yongning's illness. Of course, this matter was still limited to a very small number of people. After all, for her safety, the old emperor wouldn't spread the news of the young princess leaving the palace. None of the court officials knew about this. Although Li Yi knew that Yongning wasn't sick at all, it would be good for her to leave the palace for a few days. With a soul that didn't match this era, staying in the palace all day would probably cause her illness. He didn't dare to make any excessive requests. In the future, he would take her out of the palace for half a course of treatment every month for 3 to 5 days. The old emperor wouldn't likely refuse. In these 2 months, it took a lot of effort to finally make her understand what she could say and what she couldn't. Although most people treated her words as the nonsense of a child, when she grew up in a few years and was heard by someone with ulterior motives, there would be some trouble. Drunken Moon Restaurant. Drunken Moon Restaurant. I'm hungry. Let's go eat here. The proud Lolita didn't want to shop anymore. When they walked to a certain restaurant, she pulled on Li Yi's arm and kept shaking it. Li Yi raised his eyebrows and said, "Didn't you want to eat braised prawns today? We don't have it here." Let's eat here first. We'll eat something else when we get back. The proud Lolita, who was good at accounting, would never suffer a loss. Although she said that she would eat a lot of delicious food when they got back, that was a matter for when they got back. It didn't conflict with what they ate now. Li Yi looked at Yongning and saw her nod. He waved his hand helplessly and said, "Then let's go in. I'll go buy something over there. You guys go in first." Zhang Zumo said to them and took Xiao Chui to a shop in front of them. It was the Golden Jade Pavilion, a place that sold jewelry. Yongning was sticking to him more than she was sticking to him, and this caused Li Yi to feel rather depressed. Could it be that young girls are naturally easier to get close to? Of course, he was only slightly depressed, and he hoped that Yongning would be able to find more sustenance here. Find a quiet room. It's best if it's near the window. Li Yi looked at him and said as soon as he walked in, a waiter came out to welcome him with a smile. "Sir, have you made a reservation?" The waiter asked with a smile. "What's wrong? Is it a full house today?" Li Yi looked around. Although it was mealtime, there weren't many people eating here. There shouldn't be no room. "Sir, there is something you don't know. Guests that come to the Drunken Moon Inn must make a reservation in advance. This is the rule of the Drunken Moon Inn," the waiter patiently explained. Li Yi looked at the old man behind him. This kind of thing should be a piece of cake for them. The old man nodded and walked to the front. Not long after, the waiter wiped the sweat on his forehead, and the smile on his face became even brighter. "Sir, please go upstairs." Although he was just a small waiter in the Drunken Moon Inn, he had received many nobles on a daily basis, so he naturally had some experience. Although these people still didn't reveal their identity, the old man gave off a very scary feeling. The most important thing was that sign. In short, these people probably couldn't be easily offended. Making a reservation in advance was the rule of the Drunken Moon Inn. Rules were made to be broken. Rules for ordinary people were not suitable for some people. On the way upstairs, the gray-clothed old man frowned and asked, "Why not the Sky Room one?" The waiter wiped his cold sweat and said carefully, "Sir, unfortunately, the Sky Room one was booked by a group of nobles today." Okay, as long as there's food." People who came from the palace had a lot of problems. Li Yi waved his hand. This kind of mysterious sense of superiority, other than the palace, couldn't be cultivated in ordinary places. When he passed by the so-called Sky Room one, a waiter went in to serve the dishes. Li Yi casually glanced over and saw that there were quite a lot of people in the room. There was even a woman singing. She really knew how to enjoy herself. He wasn't interested in the so-called nobles there, so he turned his gaze away and was led by the waiter to a room next door. The standard of this Drunken Moon Inn was not low, even in the capital.
The private room was extremely spacious, and even the surrounding walls were hung with paintings and calligraphy. Li Yi only needed to glance at them to know that the value of these things was not low. Of course, the most representative of the standards was the price of the dishes here. A plate of tofu for 3 taels of silver. A huge profit. This was no different from robbing people. Could it be that their tofu was colorful? The price of this plate of tofu was enough to cover the annual expenses of a relatively well-off family. Not to mention ordinary people, without tens of thousands of taels of silver, they wouldn't even dare to order a plate of tofu here. Only those rich people who wanted to show off their status, at least for Li Yi, although he wasn't short of money, he wouldn't waste it like this. Of course, if the money was reimbursed by the palace, it would be a different story. When the arrogant Lolita and Yongning were discussing what to eat, Li Yi took a sip of tea and thought about something else. Since the academy was still under construction, it would take a long time. In the next period of time, he might be completely free, but he wouldn't be free for long, because the hero competition was about to begin. Downstairs in the Drunken Moon Inn, Zhang Zimo and Xiao Cui walked in. Xiao Cui pouted and said, "Bing Ning and Cinny are leaving so soon, I'm a bit reluctant." Zhang Zimo only smiled. She naturally liked the 2 innocent and cute girls. However, judging from their dressing and daily behavior, both of them had received orthodox education. Especially the girl named Li Bingning. Her family background was most likely not low. She had learned etiquette at home when she was a child, so she was a little more sensitive to these things. What's more, a few days ago, the 2 little girls each gave her a bracelet, and the other gave her a hairpin. None of them were ordinary items, and they looked expensive. How could an ordinary person take them out? Although she didn't know their specific identity, she could guess a little. How could the daughters of such a big family be fostered in someone else's house for a long time? A few days ago, she ordered 2 bracelets from the Golden Jade Pavilion. In terms of value, it might not be comparable to the things they gave, but as a parting gift, it wouldn't look shabby. Seeing that there were guests coming in, a waiter immediately went to greet them. Xiao Cui described a few words to them, and the waiter immediately stretched out his hand respectfully. "2 ladies, please go upstairs, the person you are looking for is in the 2nd sky room." The 2 of them walked up the stairs, and at this moment, a young man walked out of the 1st room. When he saw the waiter walking toward him, he cursed. "Why haven't you served the 2 pots of 1000-day drunken wine yet? Why are you wasting your time looking for them?" Halfway through his words, he looked at the 2 girls behind the waiter, and his expression was slightly startled. A puzzled expression appeared on his face, and he scratched his head, as if he remembered something, and immediately exclaimed, "It's you." Chapter 536. Today, in this Drunken Moon Tower, we are holding a banquet for you. The banquet is a little shabby. I hope you don't mind. In the 1st room of Drunken Moon Tower, a luxuriously dressed young man raised his glass to the handsome young man opposite him. "Although I live far away in Chuzhou, I know that this Drunken Moon Tower is not shabby. Besides, we are all on the same side. Xiaofan, you are welcome." The young man waved his hand and took a sip of wine. He turned to the person next to him and asked, "When we were in Chuzhou, I heard that Brother Qin was unwell. How are you now?" "I am fine." Qin Yu cupped his hands and said, "Recently, he had just recovered. According to the doctor's advice, he should focus on recuperation and should not be too active." However, Duanyang's identity was special. Among his peers, someone of similar status had to come out to greet him. Chen Lijun and Cui Qingyu were busy, so he was the only one left. The young man smiled and said, "With your identity, you should take more guards with you when you go out in the future." Qin Yu nodded. He was used to being domineering in the capital and no one dared to stop him. Who would have thought that he would encounter what happened last time? After this incident, he had greatly increased the number of guards to avoid encountering strong people in Jianghu like last time. At this moment, there were about 10 young people at the banquet. Among them, little Duke Qin and Duanyang were the leaders. Duanyang was the son of King Hui. His mother was the legitimate daughter of the Cui family, and the younger sister of concubine Cui. Therefore, he had a close relationship with the Cui family and the king of Shu. The young man looked at Qin Yu and asked, "Have you seen Brother King of Shu these days?" "His Highness has closed the door of his mansion since he came out of the palace." Qin Yu shook his head and said, "Although I'm not in the capital, I've heard about what happened to the king of Shu. Who exactly is the county magistrate of Chang'an? How could he be so free and unfettered when he offended his superior? What's going on?" Speaking of this matter, Royal Prince Duanyang's face showed a hint of sternness. He only had a general idea of this matter, but he did not know the details. The people at the banquet looked at each other. Speaking of which, half of the people present had the most direct impression of who that county magistrate Li was. Every time he thought about the matter of the academy's enrollment, he couldn't help but feel depressed. Then he's a complete lunatic," one of them said through gritted teeth. It was more suitable to describe County Uncle Li as a madman than to describe young Duke Qin. Putting aside the fact that he had beaten up a prince in public, he was the only person in the history of the country who could force His Majesty and all the officials to submit even though he was recruiting students for the academy. He had neglected his duties for personal reasons and openly targeted the King of Shu's faction. Even though they'd managed to get a spot in the end, the price they'd paid was huge. Of course, this involved deeper matters, and it wasn't something they could participate in. No one present dared to provoke that person. After all, who would dare to provoke a lunatic who had intermittent hysteria, who could act up at any time, and who would not be severely punished even if he beat up a prince? It was said that even the Princess Royal, who was always with him, had contracted intermittent hysteria. Of course, these speculations were not suitable to be voiced out now. Qin Yu lowered his head and drank his wine. When he heard the name Li Yi to Royal Prince Duanyang, there was no expression on his face, but a trace of haze appeared in the depths of his eyes. At this moment, someone came in from outside. A young man dressed as a servant walked over quickly and said a few words in Qin Yu's ear. Qin Yu suddenly turned around and looked at him. After a moment, he stood up from his seat with an extremely gloomy expression. "Young Duke Qin. What's wrong?" Everyone was surprised and also stood up one after another. "Why hasn't she come yet?" The dishes on the table were almost served, but because eldest Miss Zhang hadn't arrived yet, Li Yi and the two little Lolas hadn't moved their chopsticks. She took a sip of tea and looked outside in confusion. "Yes, when will elder sister Zhang come? I'm starving." The proud Lolita covered her stomach to protest. "If you keep eating like this, you're going to get fat," Li Yi kindly reminded her. She was the emperor's most beloved princess and had lived a luxurious life since she was a child. Now that she was out of the palace, she couldn't control her mouth and wanted to taste anything delicious. "How is that possible? I practice martial arts with Imperial Sister every day." The proud Lolita looked indifferent. Then, she seemed to remember something and looked at Li Yi angrily and asked, "What's wrong? If I get fat, you won't want me anymore? I'm telling you." "Stop, stop, stop." Li Yi had a headache and hurriedly waved his hand. "Don't say such things in front of your imperial father and imperial mother." The unconvinced proud Lolita wanted to say something more, but the door was suddenly pushed open. Zheng Zumo walked in with a flustered expression and said, "Quick, let's go." The proud Lolita and Yong Ning were the first to be pulled up by her and quickly walked out of the door. Li Yi also stood up curiously. The proud Lolita shouted as she walked out of the door, "Hey, don't go. We haven't eaten a bite yet. There's still a beggar's chicken not served." The gray-robed elder standing at the door stopped the woman who was holding the two princesses. From the room on the side, a figure walked out. Then 2, 3, and more than 10 people walked out. Zheng Zumo's face was pale as she protected the two little girls behind her. Xiao Chui stood beside her. When she saw the man walking in front of the crowd, there was no trace of blood on her pretty face. "It's over," she thought in her heart. "They are." Royal Prince Duanyang looked at the woman in front of him and a trace of amazement flashed through his eyes. However, if it was only because he liked this woman, Qin Yu shouldn't have such a big reaction. After all, it was well known that his hobbies were different from others. Qin Yu covered his chest with one hand. It seemed that he felt pain again, but more shame. A trace of mockery appeared at the corner of his mouth and he said, "Two ladies, what a coincidence." Zheng Zumo pushed the two little girls behind her, and her heart completely sank. Young Duke Qin. She didn't expect that there would be a day when she would see him again, and on such an occasion. That day, she and Xiao Chui disguised themselves as men and hurriedly escaped from the scene. After finding Wanru watching, they changed into women's clothes. Later,
she learned that young Duke Qin was beaten in the street. The matter was very big, and the whole city was searching for the perpetrator. At that time, she was actually also nervous. It was not until later, when the matter gradually subsided, that she and Xiao Chui were relieved. However, she never thought that she would be recognized like this today. Thinking of the other party's power and background, her body trembled and she couldn't help but take a step back. After that, she felt a hand patting her shoulder. Li Yi walked out of the room, and when the mocking smile on Qin Yu's face froze, he spoke with a smile. Yes, it's really a coincidence. Young Duke Qin. Crash. At the same time that Li Yi took a step forward, several people on the opposite side couldn't help but take a step back. Li Yi, County Uncle Li, who had long been famous in the capital, was likely to go crazy and kill people on the spot. Who didn't know him? Who wasn't afraid? Who is he? Royal Prince Duanyang looked around, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face as he asked. He is Li Yi, someone said with a complicated expression, County Uncle of Chong and Li Yi. Chapter 537. It's really a coincidence, Qin Yu said after a while, and the expression on his face had returned to indifference. Young master, this beggar's chicken. Shall we take it in? A waiter of the Zuyu Tower stood at the stairway, looked at the scene in front of him, and said in a trembling voice, Take it in, we have paid for it. The proud Lolita had been thinking about the chicken for a long time, and immediately urged. Xiao Tsue's face was full of fear, and she was about to cry. Young lady, what time is it? Why are you still thinking about the beggar's chicken? They can't even leave. Young Duke Qin, if there is no other urgent matter, we will go in. Li Yi pointed to the inside of the room and said, The dishes will be cold later. Qin Yu took a deep breath, glanced at the strange little girl, and said with a smile, Uncle Li, please help yourself, but these two girls can't leave. Li Yi looked at him in astonishment and asked, Why is this so? In broad daylight, with the heaven and earth bright and clear, could it be that young Duke Qin wants to put on a good show of forcefully snatching a girl from a good family? When Li Yi spoke, he deliberately emphasized the word again. The smile on Qin Yu's face froze, and then his chest began to rise and fall slightly. The rest of the people looked at him. Mother Fastris Kerr, it's just a slap in the face. Young Duke Qin was beaten and seriously injured by a passing Jianghu swordsman because he molested a good girl in the street, and he had to rest at home for several months. It could be said that he had lost his face completely. When people mentioned this matter, they would only say that he was injured by a villain, and no one dared to mention molesting a good girl. This Uncle Li was really good at slapping people's faces and cursing people's shortcomings. Last time in the Imperial Palace, he slapped young Duke Qin fiercely twice, and now this sentence was no less than a slap in the face, which was a double blow to his spirit and body. There were rumors among the people that this Uncle Li was worthy of being the nemesis of young Duke Qin. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. County Uncle Li, be careful with your words. When Qin Yu spoke again, he didn't hide the anger in his eyes. If it were someone else, he would have already sent out his guards to vent the anger that had accumulated in his heart for the past few months. However, at this moment, he was just angry. After all, although he had the title of Madman Qin, the person in front of him was a real madman. He didn't have to take responsibility for beating people, and he was a madman with a certificate of the Imperial Physician Bureau. Hey, young Duke Qin, don't be modest. Li Yi reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Then he turned to Zhang Zumo and said, Let's go. We've been out for a long time. The food is cold. Zhang Zumo bit his teeth and said, You guys go in first. They won't do anything to us. She knew what kind of impact the previous incident would have. The government defined it as an assassination. If the swordsman was caught, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, she and Xiao Chui were also victims. Even if they really went to the government, they could explain it clearly. There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion, who also had extraordinary power in the court. She didn't want to get Li Yi involved. Li Yi didn't rush in this time. He looked at her and asked, How do you know him? Xiao Chui said with some grievance, Yes, last time when Miss and I just came to the capital, they insisted that Miss and I go with them. A passing swordsman couldn't stand it, so he beat him hard. So those two women are you?
It was also the first time that Li Yi had heard of this matter, and his tone was a little surprised. It was really true that people who were not a family would not enter the house. This young Duke Qin and him were opposite of each other. Seeing that young Duke Qin was obviously no match for County Magistrate Li, a young man immediately stood out and said, "Li, Supervisor Li, these two women are involved in the case of the assassination of young Duke Qin. We have sent someone to inform the government, and there will be an official coming soon. Is Supervisor Li going to protect them?" "You are?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. The young man said, "I am Li Jianren." "Oh, from the family of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works?" Li Yi still had some impression of this name. After all, there weren't many people who could come up with such a fresh and refined name. It was high-end and classy. "Yes." Li Jianren cupped his hands, but he was depressed in his heart. In this kind of occasion, it was not suitable for him to stand out. After all, he still had to study at the mathematics college in the future. If he offended the supervisor before he officially enrolled, would he have a good life in the future? "Not bad, not bad. I will remember you." Li Yi nodded and said, "Then there is no hurry. Let's wait for the official to come first." He looked back at Zhang Zimo and said, "What are you waiting for? Go in and eat. It cost a lot of money." When he was about to go in, he looked back at Qin Yu and asked seriously, "Is it necessary?" "It is," Qin Yu said with a smile. Li Yi nodded, turned around, and closed the door. Watching them walk back into the room and close the door, Prince Duanyang was already full of anger. Arrogant, simply too arrogant. Although he was far away in Chuzhou and was not very familiar with the affairs of the capital, he did not expect that a small county uncle would dare to be so presumptuous in front of him and young Duke Qin. Li Jianren and Cui Shixin and the others shook their heads. This was arrogance? Royal Prince Duanyang seemed to have underestimated County Uncle Li too much. Beating up young Duke Qin, beating up His Royal Highness King of Shu, forcing the officials and His Majesty to make concessions, everything he did could not be described as arrogant. Prince Duanyang was angry and kicked the door of the private room, but was stopped by Qin Yu. "Wait." Qin Yu only said this one word. He had dealt with Li Yi more than once, so naturally, he would not look down on him. It was not suitable for him and Prince Duanyang to intervene in this matter. If the government directly intervened, it would be official business. Even if Li Yi was favored by the emperor, could he reach into the government of the capital? But the Qin family could. Although Chen Yu of the Chen family was no longer the capital magistrate and some things did become troublesome, at least half of the people present did not care about a small capital magistrate. The Jingdou magistrate Lu Daiyou also knew that in the eyes of those famous wastrels in Jingdou, he, the Jingdou magistrate, was nothing and would be held back in every way. In his heart, he cursed the little Duke Qin. What's the use of finding those two women? If you have the ability, go and find that hero who beat you up. You failed to flirt with an innocent woman and got beaten up instead. You've lost all your face, and you still dare to come out and make a fool of yourself. Now, you seem to want to do something to those two innocent women. Do you really think that you own the government? However, he could not ignore this matter and even had to go in person. After all, he could not afford to offend any of those people. Hurry up! County Magistrate Lu opened the curtain and urged the sedan bearers. Drunken Moon Tower. Room number 2. Outside the door, there were several people watching vigilantly to prevent the people inside from slipping away. Inside the room, the arrogant Lolita ate without caring about her image. Li Yi had no interest in the beggar's chicken, but he had to say that the tea here was not bad. It was just a little expensive, 10 taels of silver for a pot. He really felt sorry for the old emperor. Go get another pot of tea. He turned his head and ordered the waiter standing behind him. The gray-robed old man next to him finally could not help frowning at him and asked, "Is it necessary?" Li Yi looked at him and asked in surprise, "Isn't it just 2 pots of tea? Won't the palace reimburse it?" After a moment he sighed and said, "You just heard, he said it is necessary." Chapter 538. Zhang Zumo looked at Li Yi with a worried expression. She wanted to say something but stopped. "What about me? Let's eat." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Do you still have any melon seeds?"
I still want the cream flavor. Zheng Zumo took out a small embroidered bag from her waist and said, "There's no cream flavor left. There's only 5 cents left." "Forget it. It's still edible." Li Yi nodded, then looked at the 2 brocade boxes she placed on the table and asked, "What are these?" "A gift for Bing Ning and Xine." Perhaps Li Yi's calmness infected her. Zheng Zumo relaxed a little and said, "What? What gift?" Hearing the gift, the proud lowly put down the drumstick and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. "It's not something expensive. Open it and see if you like it." Zheng Zumo handed over the box and said with a smile, "Wow, there's a gift." The proud Lolita still had the temperament of a young girl. She couldn't wait to take the brocade boxes. The 2 brocade boxes had her and Yongning's names written on them. She handed the other brocade box to Yongning and quickly opened her own brocade box. So beautiful. Seeing the thing lying in the box, the proud lowly couldn't help but exclaim. Li Yi looked at it. It turned out to be a bracelet. This kind of accessory was very common in the future, but it naturally didn't exist in the present. He once told Zhang Zumo that he could open an accessory shop in the future and sell it with ready-made clothes. Of course, it was impossible to use precious gems in this world. The premise was that he could first burn the glass, which could greatly reduce the cost. However, this idea would probably have to wait for a long time. After all, those sparkling and translucent things were very expensive. Even if ordinary glass was sold at the price of gemstones, there would still be countless people fighting to buy it. The profit was unimaginable, even far exceeding that of perfume and spirits. However, it was not suitable to take it out too early. The thing on these 2 bracelets was naturally not glass, but it could also be regarded as jewelry. However, with Zheng Zumo's current wealth, she could easily buy it. And this strangely shaped bracelet should have been personally designed by her. Although the proud Lolita lived in the palace and had seen countless jewelry, it was impossible for her to have seen this kind. "Thank you, Sister Zheng." After the proud lowly came back to her senses, she smiled sweetly at Zhang Zumo. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the other drumstick in her bowl for Zhang Zumo. "Thank you, big sister." Yongning was not as excited as her sister, but she still looked very happy. Zheng Zumo looked at the 2 of them, then looked outside the door and said worriedly, "They?" Li Yi put a piece of tofu in her bowl and said, "Don't worry, people who disturb other people's meals usually don't have a good ending. Hurry up and eat. It's really going to get cold." Xiao Chui was on the verge of tears. The people outside were all fiendish, and it was obvious that they were not good people. They were about to call the officials, so how could the young miss and Lili still eat? With tears in her eyes, she picked up a piece of tofu. "Aya, this tofu is really delicious. No wonder it only costs 3 taels of silver. I have to have a good taste. This person is so bold and arrogant. I don't believe you can bear it until now." In another room, Duke Duanyang looked at Qinyu and said. Qinyu lowered his head and drank a cup of wine, without saying anything. With his character, he naturally would not let go of those who offended him so easily. However, on the surface he could not do anything at all. These days, his grandfather was very strict with him. Most of the time, he was grounded at home or recuperated, but in fact, he did a lot of things secretly. However, the first time he sent someone to follow him, he was beaten up and thrown into a deep alley. The second time, his leg was directly broken. After that, he sent out a martial arts master secretly recruited, but the result was the same. Now, the Qin's mansion had a lot of people with broken hands and feet. After that, he gave up the idea of secretly taking revenge. No matter how proud he was, he had to admit that he was helpless against Li Yi. Originally, after beating up the king of Shu, he entrusted this matter to the king of Shu. However, he did not expect that after the king of Shu came out of the palace, he became a good boy, reading at home all day or visiting some officials of the court. Until now, he had not seen the king of Shu. The humiliation he suffered on the street last time made him the laughingstock of the whole capital, which was still unforgettable. This time, when he met these 2 women again in the Drunken Moon Tower, he naturally would not let them go. However, with the intervention of Li Yi, he had to be careful. The best way was to borrow a knife. Borrowing a knife from the imperial court. As long as he insisted that the 2 women were related to the thief, the following things would naturally be logical. No matter how arrogant he was,
Someone would not forgive him for daring to interfere with the imperial court's investigation. At this time, the door was pushed open. A servant of the Qin's mansion came in and said, "Young master, Lord Lu is here." Qin Yu stood up from his seat and walked out of the door. He cupped his hands in obeisance to a person who had just walked up the stairs and said with a smile, "This time, I have caused trouble for Lord Lu." The current capital magistrate, Lu Daiyou, did not belong to Prime Minister Qin. He used to work under the capital governor, Dong Wenyun, and Dong Wenyun's father-in-law was Prime Minister Shen, who had the same status as his grandfather. Therefore, although he looked down on this capital magistrate, he could not be too arrogant at this moment. "Young Duke Qin, you are too serious." County Magistrate Lu also cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile, "This is my duty." "Young Duke Qin, you don't have to be so polite." Qin Yu smiled and pointed to the young man beside him and said, "This is Prince Duanyang." County Magistrate Lu was shocked. He did not expect that this matter would involve Prince Duanyang. This was an existence that he could not afford to offend. He hurriedly cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "Greetings, Prince Duanyang." The young man waved his hand and said, "Sir, you'd better get down to business first. The two people are in the room behind you." Hearing this, County Magistrate Lu immediately became a little vigilant. There was Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and all the other hedonistic young masters of the capital. Which one of them didn't have a heaven-defying background? Yet, they had gone out of their way to invite an official over. If someone said that there was no inside story to this matter, he wouldn't believe it even if they beat him to death. However, as the county magistrate, this was indeed his duty. At this time, he could only bite the bullet and do it. "Sir, do you want to break the door?" Seeing County Magistrate Lu pointing to the door, a yamen runner immediately asked. The more than 10 yamen runners who followed him here looked a little excited. They were working for these big shots. If they did it well, County Magistrate Lu would benefit a lot. Naturally, they would also benefit a lot. "Knock on the door." County Magistrate Lu glared at him and said, "A group of brainless things. If there was really something good, would these people let them come here?" It was obvious that there was trouble. Before the yamen runner had time to knock on the door opened from the inside. Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Lu standing at the door and said in surprise, "Hey, County Magistrate Lu, why are you here? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Lu was stunned for a moment, then his face immediately showed a happy expression and said, "Sir Li, how come it's you? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Lu was full of gratitude for this former County Magistrate Li. If it were not for him, he was afraid that he would still be in the position of Anqi County Magistrate, waiting to retire. How could he sit in the position of the capital magistrate? His future was even brighter. He was afraid that in a few years or dozens of years, he would be able to sit in one of the highest positions. Seeing that the two people were standing at the door and chatting, Prince Duanyang was stunned. After being stunned for a while, Qin Yu's face gradually became gloomy. The rest of the people looked at County Magistrate Lu and were even more surprised. They had asked him to come here to arrest people. Who would have thought that County Magistrate Lu would actually chat with them? Chapter 539. Ahem, Lord Lu. Royal Prince Duanyang finally couldn't help opening his mouth. His tone was a little high and there was a bit of dissatisfaction in his voice. County Magistrate Lu just remembered why he knocked on the door. He looked at Li Yi, then looked at young Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang, and the others. The person they wanted to arrest was actually related to Lord Li? This bunch of fellas truly harbored malicious intentions. This was the noble person in his life. Not only did he not want to offend him, but from other aspects, it was also very unwise to offend an important official who was favored by the emperor. "Lord Lu, this is." Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked with a faint smile. "This." County Magistrate Lu's heart was extremely tangled. It was so good to play with his concubine at home. Why did he have to run out and get involved in this muddy water? Wasn't he looking for trouble for himself? "I want to eat this and this too." A clear voice came from the room. County Magistrate Lu's eyes inadvertently glanced at it and could no longer move away. That little girl waving chopsticks, why did she look so much like Princess Shining? Last time when he was summoned to the palace, He accidentally met Arrestor Li. No, it should be Princess Royal Highness. At that time, there was another person beside Princess Royal Highness. County Magistrate Lu vaguely remembered that the palace servants called her Princess Xiaoning. Because of this, he looked at the little girl a few more times and had a deep memory. If the little girl in the room wore a palace dress, wouldn't she be Princess Xiaoning? He looked back at the several bailiffs with weapons on their waists, only felt his lips dry, and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Lord Li. When he looked back at Li Yi again, his voice was a little trembling. Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, "If Lord Lu is tired, go home and take a nap."
"Thank you, Lord Li. I'm indeed a little tired. I'm leaving now. I'll visit you another day."
After saying that, County Magistrate Lu hurriedly turned around and kicked the nearest runner's ass as he said angrily, "What are you still doing here? Go back." In the astonished and puzzled eyes of the crowd, several bailiffs were kicked on their butts and all of them were kicked down the stairs one by one. Even the figure of County Magistrate Lu soon disappeared from everyone's sight. "This Lu Dayo, what the hell is he doing?" Li Jianren said angrily, not expecting such a thing to happen. County Magistrate Lu came and returned. This dramatic scene stunned everyone for a long time. Qin Yu cupped his fists forward and said, "I admire you, I admire you. I didn't expect the Jingqing magistrate to be Li Xianhua's man." Li Yi quickly shook his head and said, "You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want." Young Duke Qin, you have to take responsibility for what you say.
Impudent.
Prince Duanyang snorted coldly and said, "How dare you cover up a criminal and collude with an official of the imperial court?"
What Duke Duanyang?
Li Yi looked at Prince Duanyang and said, "I'm afraid that Duke Duanyang can't accuse me of this. We're all smart people. You all know what kind of person young Duke Qin is. It's not enough for him to flirt with an innocent family once. Now he even wants to put the blame on others. Let me make it clear. Today, none of you can take him away." Qin Yu's face was gloomy, and the others looked at each other. This time, they really shed all pretenses of cordiality.
Bastard.
King Hui's fief was in Chuzhou, and Prince Duanyang was like a crown prince in Chuzhou. He had never been treated so arrogantly. He pointed at Li Yi's nose and scolded. Li Yi looked at him and said seriously, "I'm a person who can't stand being scolded.
If you scold me, I'll hit you."
Prince Duanyang was stunned for a moment. Instead of getting angry, he laughed. "Hit me? Do you have the guts?" Li Jianren took a step back, Cui Shixin took a step back, and Chen Lisan took a step back to avoid being affected. There used to be two people who had the same idea as Prince Duanyang. Among them, one was lying at home for 2 days, and the other was lying for 2 months. One was standing in front of them now, and the other was still in the prince's mansion. In terms of status, which one of them was inferior to Prince Duanyang?
"Guards."
Royal Prince Duanyang coldly snorted and said, "Go in and arrest those 2 women. Send them to the government office. I want to see how bold this official Li is. Let's see if he dares to stop us." He looked at Li Yi and said with a sneer, "I am helping the imperial court to arrest criminals. If someone tries to stop me and gets hurt, don't blame others." This was a threat. Prince Duanyang believed that with such a legitimate reason, he would be confident even when facing the emperor. Li Yi took a step back, walked into the room and said, "I advise Prince Duanyang not to come in." The playboys behind Prince Duanyang were vigilant. Although they said so, from their expressions, they all hoped that Prince Duanyang would go in. Could it be that he really planned to beat up Royal Prince Duanyang here? Did he really think that he could be lawless because he had intermittent hysteria? The same reason could be used once, but if it was used a second time, many people would not agree. Prince Duanyang sneered, strode into the room and said, "I came in, what can you do to me?" Li Yi kicked Prince Duanyang's chest and kicked him out of the room. Prince Duanyang's body hit the railing before he fell to the ground. He clutched his chest, and his facial features twisted together. He stretched out a hand with difficulty, pointed at Li Yi and said, "Take him down." A few armed men rushed into the room and surrounded Li Yi. From the way he had easily kicked the regional king out of the room, they could tell that he had some skills. The few of them placed their hands on the hilts of their swords. Clutching his chest, Royal Prince Duanyang pushed through the crowd and walked in with a gloomy expression. He pulled out a long saber from the waist of a guard and coldly said, "Harboring a criminal and attempting to assassinate a royal prince.
This prince will now bring people to arrest you. If you dare to resist again, don't blame this prince." Qin Yu's expression was as calm as an ancient well. He calmly looked at Li Yi. He was as bold as ever. At this moment, Royal Prince Duanyang had been dragged into this. Not only would he not be able to protect the two women, but he would also be in a lot of trouble. Zheng Zumo ran over from behind with a pale face. She did not expect things to develop like this. She was about to speak, but she saw Li Yi wave his hand and said to Prince Duanyang, "Swords have no eyes. Prince Duanyang should be careful. Fighting and killing is not good. Can't you just sit down and talk?" Talk. Prince Duanyang's chest rose and fell, and his breathing was rapid. It took him a lot of effort to suppress the urge to raise his knife and kill. Li Yi sighed, pointed at Prince Duanyang, who was holding a knife, and the aggressive people next to him, and said to the gray-robed old man, "Protect him." The old man nodded and opened a window behind him. Prince Duanyang's expression froze, and he suspected that he had heard wrong. Qin Yu's expression changed slightly, and he raised his head to look at Li Yi. Seeing that his expression was still calm, he did not know why, but the feeling in his heart that something bad was about to happen became stronger. "What did he just say?" Behind them, Cui Shixin asked in confusion. "Go home." Li Jianren thought for a moment and said, "Go home?" Cui Shixin shook his head. Things had already come to this. Did he think he could still leave? You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.